IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. A little special night edition of Buy Sell Hold, and I'm looking forward to this. I'm actually excited to do the show. I'm looking forward to doing the show. However, just need y'all right away to just be patient with me here, real quick. I am home alone the next few days. My wife's out of town at a conference. And of course, I've got Sadie, who just had surgery, but she's starting to run around a little bit more. So I'm going to have to sometimes stop and make sure that she is staying here over by me. So I would appreciate a little bit of patience when that time happens. So I would greatly appreciate that. I've got actually both girls down here with me, Sadie and Rita. So I will appreciate a little patience there. But I got lots of great buy, sell, hold submissions from y'all today. I'm excited about it. Just a reminder of how this works. If you submit a buy, sell, hold on the premium message board, we will bring those over. Since tonight is a solo show, we're just doing buy, sell, holds. Then I believe I got all of them up there. If you want to get one in now, this is a members only thing. The only way to get one in now is to put in a super chat. So otherwise, we are going to get rocking and rolling here with tons of great and there's a lot of variety too. There wasn't just like, okay, these are the 3 flavor of the day topics. There was a lot of really interesting stuff. Not a lot of repeat stuff from what we've had in the past. You know, that can be a problem when you do the same show every week. We've had that problem in the mailbag in the past, but a lot of really good submissions, and I'm looking forward to getting to them right now. So we are going to kick things off with a couple buy, sell, holds for my guy, Joe Allen, 72. He starts off and says, Ivan Taylor's decommitment and committing to the armpit of college football hinders Notre Dame's chances of recruiting Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. I'm going to sell that. I don't think it has anything to do with what Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng is going to do. I mean, look, Michigan's putting together a good defensive class. I don't think their offensive class is all that good right now, but they have done relatively well at certain positions in their defensive class. There's really no way to deny that. I mean, they've got a couple really good defensive linemen. Nathaniel Marshall's a kid that I like a lot. Jalen Williams is a good player, solid player. They got Julius Holly's a good edge player, kind of a 3-4 outside linebacker defensive end for them. They don't have any. They have one linebacker committed, Chase Taylor. He's okay. You know, their secondary class has 2 now really good safeties in it. And so obviously that's going to be good for them. But, their offensive class to me is not very good. And so right now, overall, Notre Dame still has a better class than I believe than what Michigan has. Even with the 2 defensive linemen at the top, I think top to bottom, I like Notre Dame's class better. Notre Dame's linebacker class is clearly better, and their secondary class is still better. I don't think it's going to have any impact at all. I've said this before. Players don't normally make emotional decisions. You know, how many times have we seen in the past where, you know, a kid decommits and there's this panic of, does this mean a bunch of other guys are going to decommit? And it never happens. Or they lose a game. This is my favorite. They lose a game during the season that they're not supposed to. Or there's going to be a mass exodus of kids from the class. And it never happens. Because these kids aren't growing up as fans of Notre Dame or whatever team they commit to, so they don't make the same type of emotional reaction to successes and failures as we do as fans. So that's just the reality of it. And again, I think that if he's going to look at the 2 classes, I don't see how he's going to look at Michigan's and be like, yeah, that's better than what Notre Dame has. I don't think that's going to be the case. Next one from Joe Allen, 72. Marcus Freeman ends up on the short list for the Dodd Award at the end of the season. I'm buying that. A couple reasons I'm buying that. Number one is obviously he's on the watch list. I put that out the other day. But the other thing is I've said before, my prediction for Notre Dame is that they are going to be a playoff team +1. So I think they get to the Elite 8. I think that Marcus Freeman, if he gets them to that level where they're a home seed in the playoff, which I expect them to be, 11-1, 12-0 type of season, which I certainly think is possible. 11-1 is expected by me. 12-0 is possible. It's just I don't know if I can predict that because it's hard to go undefeated, but it's certainly possible. And if he does that, he's going to have some pretty big wins under his belt. He'll either have a home win over Florida State. Well, he'll have three of 4 wins for guaranteed. If they go 11-1 in their playoffs, he's got 3 or 4 wins guaranteed. at A&M, home against Louisville, home against Florida State, at USC. If they're 11-1, they can't go any worse than 3-1 in those. So those are some big wins there. It'll be another jump, and I think he'll be on the short list. That doesn't mean he's going to win it. I think he'll put him on the short list. The way that he wins it, in my opinion, is if Notre Dame goes undefeated and they're the 5 seed. I think Marcus Freeman would absolutely have a chance to win it if they do that. If they go 12-0, then I would, barring somebody like a Lance Leopold leading Kansas to an 11-1 season and going to the college football playoff, or barring some team that we're not expected making a run and going 12-0 with some big wins, I certainly think that he'll have a shot to do that. I mean, if Marcus Freeman goes 12-0 and Kirby Smart goes 12-0, there's a much better chance that Marcus Freeman goes 12 that wins this award, because you kind of expect Georgia to do that, where Notre Dame you don't. And that's where a lot of that positive vibes comes from. So, and this award's been given out since 1976, I believe, and Notre Dame's only had one coach win it. Brian Kelly won it once back in 2018. So it would be quite an honor for Notre Dame if they could have another coach win it, and it would be great PR for Freeman, because he could kind of have that type of season would certainly, have a great. It would certainly have I'm trying to think of the word to way to say this. It would certainly have ramifications for how the perception for Notre Dame. And then if he goes out and wins an award like that, then all of a sudden you start having to talk about Marcus Freeman a little bit differently than you have so far. As you guys can see, Sadie was just clawing on my leg, so she wants to be on my lap. So she is now on my lap. So hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Can you guys let me know in the chat if my volume is still good, since I'm a little bit further away from the mic right now? All right, let's get back at it. All right. Irish Nation with a buy-sell hold. We will see at least 2 rematches in conference championship week this season. So I actually did a little bit of research on this one before the show started, because I thought that was a very interesting submission. And so I started to kind of look into a couple different scenarios. And so there's 2 for sure that we could see a rematch. There's no doubt about it. I think that the Big Ten certainly has a chance to have a rematch between Oregon and Ohio State. Ohio State also plays Penn State, which could potentially be a rematch. And then obviously they play Michigan, which could be a rematch, because I have a hard time seeing Ohio State not being in the Big Ten title game. I have a really hard time seeing them lose two games in the Big Ten. I just do. And if they lose one to Oregon, Penn State, or Michigan, there's a chance that they could have a rematch with one of those 2 teams. So that's certainly possible. And so I think the Big Ten is one. I think the 2 best teams in the SEC are Texas and Georgia. They play each other. Georgia also plays Bama, which could create a potential rematch if those 2 teams are the 2 best teams in the league. So I certainly think there's a chance there. In our predictions, Vince and I's predictions, we had 2 leagues for sure doing that, because the other one was the ACC. We both had Clemson and Florida State playing each other. In the ACC title game, they play each other in the regular season. The difference is I had Florida State winning the regular season game and Clemson winning the rematch. And I believe for Vince it was flipped, or he might have had Florida State winning both. I forget which one he had, but I had Clemson winning the ACC title game in a rematch against Florida State. And then when you look at the Big 12, it's possible there also. And so this is why I'm buying this overall, because when you look at the Big 12 and you look at the schedule for the Big 12, there's some potential rematches there. I think Oklahoma State has a chance to be that team in the league this year. They play Utah and Kansas State this year. And so I think those are 2 legitimate contenders to the league crown. The only exception could be is if Arizona or Kansas are playing in the title game, because their schedules are kind of interesting. Kansas and Kansas State could be a rematch potentially, but Kansas State doesn't play Oklahoma State or Utah or Arizona in the regular season. So Kansas has a very favorable schedule. Their league schedule is at West Virginia, which is no easy game, home against TCU, at Arizona State, home against Houston, at K-State, home against Iowa State, at BYU, home against Colorado, and at Baylor. So no Okie State, no Arizona, no Utah for Kansas. So if Kansas is in there, the chances of it being a rematch are a little less, unless, obviously, you have actually K-State in there with them. And then Arizona is another one. They play at Utah, but they don't play K-State, they don't play Kansas, and they don't play Oklahoma State. So there's a little less chance in the Big 12 for a number of reasons, but I think there's at least an opportunity in the Big 12, which means there's a chance in all 4 Power 5 leagues that you see a potential for a rematch, because there's not you don't have the divisions anymore, which I think helps with that. But I also look at it and feel that with that being the case, that greatly enhances the opportunity that there's two games with a rematch. So certainly I think that creates a better opportunity for that. So I'm going to buy that one. Jalen G, between the kickoff of the A&M game and signing day, Notre Dame will add more commits, including flips, than lose commits. I'm going to buy that, because I think Notre Dame, well, Jalen G, I know you're on the message board, so you read the intel piece that we put up today about Notre Dame's plans at wide receiver. So based on their plans at wide receiver, I think there's a good chance that they're going to add somebody during the season, much like a Logan Saldate, or a better example would be KK Smith. I think there's a chance they could add a guy like KK Smith to the mix. And if that happens, then obviously they'll get one. I don't know that they're going to lose anyone during the season. I'm going to have to buy that, because right now I don't predict that they're going to lose anybody. That doesn't mean it won't happen. I mean, in recruiting, who flipping knows nowadays? I mean, Ivan Taylor wasn't a shocker, but there's been some in the past that you're like, wait a minute, what? I didn't see that one coming. And so I mean, that could certainly happen. I don't know who that would be. There's no players on the list that I'm like, gee, I wonder if that guy might flip. That guy's already out of the class. That was Ivan Taylor. And so if they just add one guy, I think that's going to be a situation where they add more than they lose. So I think it's certainly possible. Domer Grizz, Southern Cal's move to the Big Ten will make it easier for Notre Dame to negotiate for the USC game to be played the last weekend of the season every year, not just when played in California. Well, I think I'm going to buy that it makes it easier. Yes. I don't think that's going to necessarily happen, because I don't know that Notre Dame is trying to make that happen. I don't know if that's something that's kind of on their radar. I don't know if that's something that they're necessarily pushing for. I don't know that Notre Dame feels the same way about that game not being in November when it's at home as fans do. So I don't have any clue if that's something that bothers the leadership at Notre Dame. I don't. Having said that, the reason I'm buying this is because you didn't ask me if it's going to happen. You simply asked that it would make it easier. And I certainly think it makes it easier, because now that USC's in the Big Ten, they can't avoid November games. If they schedule a game against Notre Dame, if they put that at the end of the year, then that's one less road game that they have to play in November. And so you can make it the rivalry game at the end of the year, the same weekend that other teams are playing their big rivalry game, and say, hey, look, if we're going to go out east in the cold, I'd rather do that than have to maybe have a chance of getting stuck out in Rutgers or Madison, Wisconsin, or Minneapolis, or State College, somewhere that's a little bit tougher to get to, and a little bit of an environment that players aren't more comfortable with, because a lot of USC kids will have been at Notre Dame a couple times, will have visited Notre Dame. So I certainly think that it could make it easier. I don't know that it's going to happen, but the question wasn't, will it happen? The question was, will it make it easier to happen? That I think that it would make it easier if that's something that Notre Dame wanted to pursue. Crable with a buy, sell, hold. The College Football Playoff Committee will do away with home team campus games within 3 years and require all playoff games to be at a neutral sites, maybe incorporate more bowl games. But in all events, they will be in domes or in warm weather climates. I'm selling that. I don't think they're going to do that. I think the aspect of playing in a stadium like Notre Dame Stadium or one of the home teams is there's certainly going to be cost involved. There's going to be when you look at the college football playoff, there's going to be certain things that the college football playoff committee is going to foot the bill for like a Notre Dame, for example. But there's other fees that they're not going to have to pay to have those games in those stadiums. So I think it's cost advantageous for them. Plus, here's the other part. If they play games on neutral fields, that's 4 more games. And it would make a total of 4, 5, 6, 7. No, actually it's 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then you have that, and then the quarters. Right? So that's 8, and then 9, 10. You'd have 11 games, right? Right now, you have 11 games in the college football playoff, right? 4 first round, 4 quarterfinals, 2 semis, and the championship game. Right now, 7 of those 11 games are being played in situations where both teams have to travel. Even if it's, there's the occasional, okay, the Orange Bowl has Miami. There's the occasional, USC might be playing in a playoff game and it's in the Rose Bowl. But more often than not, 7 of those 11 games are games where you have to pay for both teams to travel. The good thing about the first round games being on a home campus is, as a college football playoff committee, you don't have to foot the bill for 4 of those games, for 4 teams in those games. Those trips are expensive. They are not cheap. And so if you can have 4 of the 11 games be on a home field, then you are giving yourself an advantage, or you're giving yourself a boost in regard to money you don't have to spend, where you would if you played it in a neutral field. So I don't think that's something that they're going to have interest in doing. I don't. And I think these are going to be super popular. I think they're going to realize that these are super popular things to do, and it's going to result in them wanting to continue to do it. Not that they haven't gotten rid of popular things before, but I don't think this is one they're going to get rid of. Mr. Emil Wagner. Buy, so hold. The safety position is in just as good a spot as if Ivan did stay in the class because he is more of a nickel and we have more than sufficient players for that spot. I'm selling that. I understand where you're coming from, but I'm selling that because anytime you have a chance to add more talent to a position, you're in a better spot. I mean, you're never in a bad spot when you have, you can never have necessarily too many good players, right? That's not how it works. I mean, you can have too many players in that you can't coach everybody up and you don't have enough opportunity for everybody to get reps. Okay, sure, that can be true. But what if one of those guys that's in that spot gets hurt? What if one of those guys doesn't pan out? What if one of those guys is needed somewhere else? So, one of the things we talked about in the show is, or actually, I don't know if this was in the show. This might have been in a conversation I was having with somebody yesterday. Once you got the 3 corners, you were in a situation, and then we broke this down when they got Dallas Golden and the Mark Zachary, where there's a lot of looks where you can have Cree Thomas outside, you can have Mark Zachary outside, and Dallas Golden is in the slot. And in fact, I expect Dallas Golden to get an opportunity to play right away in the slot. And so that would have made it a little bit tougher for Ivan Taylor to play that position right away. But what if Dallas is needed outside? What if Dallas ends up saying, hey, I want to go play wide receiver? Well, now you're in a bad spot. And so Dallas Gold's the number 1 player in the class for me on defense. And that was true when Ivan Taylor was in the class. When Ivan Taylor was in the class, and of course, Jadon committed a couple days before, but when Jadon committed and before Ivan decommitted, I had Dallas Gold number 1, Jadon Blair number 2, and Ivan Taylor number 3. Losing that number 3 guy, who I grade as a top 100 guy, is never a good thing or a net zero type of situation. It's a loss. They're gonna be okay. If you were to say the safety position is in a good spot, even though they lost Ivan Taylor, I'd say I'd buy that. I think they're still in a good spot without him. But just as good of a spot? No, because those 3 dudes are better than 2 dudes. That's, that's how I look at it. I don't think he's just some role player. That may end up being what pans out, but he's right now, I don't evaluate him that way. So no, I'm going to sell that. Mr. Emil Wagner with a couple more. Number first buy so hold on this next group. Madden Farao will commit to Notre Dame and be moved to fill the Viper spot we so desperately need. I'm going to sell that. And the reason I'm going to sell that is because could he end up playing Viper? Sure, he could end up playing Viper, but they don't need him to play Viper. It's not something that has to happen right now. There's this thing going around when it comes to Madden Farao that, and I think it's more of a media thing and a fan thing, that they're going to bring in Madden Farao and just move him to Viper. He's going to be the missing link at Viper. I'm going to tell you something right now. Every source that I have loves him at linebacker. They want him at linebacker. I have literally never once, from anyone I talk to that's associated with this commitment, this recruitment, I should say, that says, yeah, we're going to move him. Now, have I had some conversations about, in certain packages, could you move him into a pass rushing situation like a Jalen Sneed? Sure. But that's more about just getting athletes on the field. That's not saying he isn't going to be a linebacker. Could there be a scenario down the road where Notre Dame, says, hey, we are loaded at linebacker and he can get on the field if he goes here? Maybe. I mean, he's got some skill to do that, but I don't believe that's Notre Dame's intention right now. I really don't. And also, Notre Dame views Dominic Kulek as that player. They view Dominic Kulek as the Viper in the class. They do. You can agree with it, not agree with it, not like it, but that's how they view it. So there's no rush to move him there. And if anything, I could see Notre Dame doing more 3-3 stack type of stuff down the road with a Madden Farao, where he then can walk up on the edge at times, but he'd still be a linebacker in that type of alignment. So that's how I feel about that one. I just don't think there's any rush to move him. I think Notre Dame is going to give him every chance that he can to compete for linebacker jobs, just like they're going to do with Kingston, just like they did with Drake Bowen, just like they're going to do if they land Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, just like they're going to do if they land Anthony Saka and Josiah Kia. They're all going to get a chance to compete at linebacker. If an opportunity presents itself somewhere, I'm sure that they'll have the conversation. But as far as I know, and I've talked with a lot of people about this in a lot of detail, I don't believe Notre Dame has any intention right now of moving him to Viper. And he doesn't have the kind of Josh Burnham frame where you kind of worry about, like, I wanted to see Josh Burnham get a shot at linebacker. I did. I really did. But it became pretty obvious early on when Josh showed up at Notre Dame that he was going to outgrow linebacker real fast. He just was 6'3.5", super long arms, really big frame. And I just think that was kind of what you were looking at, that he was eventually going to make that move. I don't see that being the case for Madden. Next one for Mr. Emil Wagner. Buy so hold. Jeremiah Love is Darren McFadden all over again. Build, style of play, everything. Look, there's a lot of similarities. I'm not going to deny that. So I'm gonna sell it to a degree. I'm going to sell it because I think that's a little too strong. I'm sorry about that, everybody. When I look at Jeremiah Love compared to Darren McFadden, I see Darren McFadden as being a little bit taller, a little bit thicker, tad faster. But I always viewed Darren McFadden as the Notre Dame running back that I think more compares to Darren McFadden would be Josh Adams. because in this regard, because Josh was a one cut and go guy. I mean, that's just what Josh did. He was one cut and I'm getting downhill. And that was, from what I remember of Darren McFadden in college, that's what he was. He was because remember they were a I formation team and a Wildcat team with Darren McFadden. So it wasn't a whole lot of, read zone and things like that. It was a downhill cut, boom, get vertical type of guy. And I think Jeremiah will do some of that, but I think Jeremiah is a little bit more of a shifty runner. And in 3 years at Arkansas, Darren McFadden caught 46 passes for 365 yards and 2 touchdowns. I could see Jeremiah Love having a season that surpasses those numbers, especially in yards and touchdowns. So the way he was used was quite different. So I think there's some similarities in their frame. There's some similarities in their style of play. There's some similarities to how, to their speed and explosiveness. Somebody said Darren was bigger. I agree with that. I think Jeremiah Love is not as big. I think Jeremiah's more shifty, and Jeremiah is a better pass catcher. So I think those are enough differences for me to sell it, but I definitely understand where you're coming from. I don't think you're like way off base here. I don't. And I'd be willing to bet you if you went back and watched highlights of Darren McFadden in Arkansas, you'd be like, yeah, okay, I see what he's talking about. Like you'll see things right away. Like I actually did this when I saw this question. Because my head was like, okay, I get it, but let me refresh my memory of Darren McFadden. In the first couple runs, he's like stretch zone, boom, vertical home run touchdown, and you're like, yeah, I can see Jeremiah doing that. Then the more you watch it, you're just like, that's kind of who he was, right? And it wasn't as much of the kind of the read stuff and things along those lines. That is just some of the elusiveness stuff and change the direction, things like that he's going to be a little better than Darren, and Darren ran with a little bit more power than Jeremiah has, at least at this point in time in his career. Buy, sell, hold. Lucky 905. By the end of the season, Jaden Alsbury will have more snaps in the slot than Jordan Clark. That is an interesting one. So that one I'm having a little bit of a tough time with, because I'm looking at last year's stat totals, right? And last year, Thomas Harper played 438 snaps in only 11 games. Because remember, he missed a game with an injury, and then he didn't play in the bowl game. And even with that being true, he still had 84 more snaps than Jack Kaiser, who played in all 13 games. I have a hard time believing that Jaden Alsbury's role is going to be even more extensive than Jack Kaiser's from a snap standpoint. I could say this. If you put because let's look at it this way. Okay, so when you look at Thomas Harper, and right now you say, well, only 84 more snaps. He's only got to make up 84 snaps. So let's look at Thomas Harper last year with his 438 snaps divided by 11 games, and then get it out to what would it be on 13 games. If you extended it to his average to 13 games, he would have had 518 snaps. Jack had 354. That's what, 164 snaps, right? If I'm quickly doing that math properly in my head, I think that's 164 snaps. I don't know that Jaden can make up that many snaps in the difference between the nickel and the rover, or even as the backup nickel. Now, here's some counter arguments that you can make. Okay, Jack had 164 fewer snaps, but Clarence Lewis played 236 snaps last season, and according to Pro Football Focus, 191 of those were in the slot. Well, if he gets all of Clarence Lewis's snaps and all the rover snaps, then he would have more. And so I think you can make that argument. If he's also the number 2 nickel, you could maybe make that case. I just think what would happen is maybe Jordan Clark would get a few more of those snaps, and you wouldn't see as much of the backup. I think we could see some Rod Hurd in some situations. I think we could see some 3-corner looks. And there's going to be a couple games this year where I just don't think I think you're going to have to be in more of a 5 DB type of look. So I think it'll be closer than it was last year. And there's also the potential that Jalen Snead could get some of those snaps. That's the other part of it, is where I don't think last year's just one rover. This year, I think you could see it a couple in some certain situations. But I think it'll be closer than it was last year, but I don't think by the end of the season, he'll have more. I will say this, though, Lucky, is if your buy, sell, hold comes true, ends up being correct, and it happens, and it's not injury related, that's gonna be very exciting because we know who Jordan Clark is. I mean, we've seen Jordan Clark play at the Power 5 level. This isn't a guy that transferred from a Group of 5 school, and I don't know what kind of player he is, and I don't know how he's gonna progress to the next level, and I don't now that he's playing against tougher competition, how's he gonna be? There's none of those questions with Jordan Clark because Jordan Clark's played at that level. He's played at that level for 5 years. He's got 1,800 career snaps in the Pac-12, and he's been a good football player. I don't see any scenario in which he regresses this season. And when you look at his production last year, he was a good player last year, and he played against Oregon last season. He played against Arizona. They played against Washington on the road. They played against USC. They played against Colorado. So this is a kid. They played against Cam Ward at Washington State. They played against Oklahoma State, Fresno State. So this is a kid that's played against some really good football teams and has, had some good success against USC last year. They caught 2 passes on him for 25 yards on 4 targets. And, that's good production. He had a rough game against Oregon. He had a real rough game against Oregon, but against everybody else, he held his own. And so I don't see him regressing, this season and being worse than he was in year 6. I think he's going to be a pretty hungry kid, a pretty focused kid. And I think he'll at least be as good as he was last year, which means I don't see him losing a ton of those slot reps. So what does that mean? That means if he ends up not having as many snaps as Jaden Alsbury, then that's going to be a good sign because it means Jaden Alsbury was really, really, really good. Bussing the championships. Buy, sell, or hold, the Notre Dame offense will outshine the Notre Dame defense this year. If you buy it, does that hurt our chances to make a deep run in the playoffs? Number one, I'm going to buy it. And here's why I'm going to buy it. I don't know that – I'm not saying that the Notre Dame offense will necessarily be better than the defense. The question is, will outshine it? Because if the Notre Dame defense is a legitimate top 5 unit and the Notre Dame offense is a legitimate top 10 offense, not ranks in the top 10 in certain categories like the offense did last year because they padded stats against the inferior teams and then didn't perform well in the bigger games. I'm talking about as a legitimate top 10 offense. The offense is going to get way more shine than the defense, even if the defense is better because, and Jason Smith in the chat just nailed it, it's expected that the defense will be that good. Where it's not expected that the offense is going to be that good, at least from a national perspective, and maybe even with some fans. So I think the offense will outshine the defense in that regard. So I'm going to buy it in that happening. So if your follow-up was, if you buy it, does it hurt Notre Dame's chances to make a deep run in the playoffs? Well, it depends on why it outshines it. So if the Notre Dame offense is really good and the defense regresses, that would hurt Notre Dame's chances of being successful. If the Notre Dame defense kind of stays where it was last year, just about where it was last year, better in some areas, not as maybe good in some other areas, but overall, same defense, and the offense gets better and outshines the defense because of that does the opposite. So I'm going to sell that because it does the opposite. It gives Notre Dame an even better chance to compete for a championship, because they now have an offense that can play at a championship level, not just a defense that can play at a championship level. And you need both. I've said it before. And I'm curious to see if this is also true in the extended playoff, but I've said this in the past. Look, defense will get you to the show, but if you want to win a championship, right, you've got to be able to score. And that's been proven true a ton. I mean, just a ton. You have to be able to score. And you look at Michigan last year. Yeah, their defense played great against Washington. But if your offense doesn't put that game away, Washington's got the ball at the end of the game with a chance to go out there and tie that game up. I'm feeling really good about where we're at if I'm Washington. Hey, look, they've played their butts off on defense, but we're starting to figure some things out. We're starting to find some answers, and we're going to go out there and we're going to put a couple drives together and win a football game. But because Michigan put so much distance between them in the second half, Washington didn't really have a chance to come back. They choked it out of them. So your defense has to play well. There's no doubt. but you have to have the kind of offense that can put those games away. And that's what Michigan's offense did last season. Because what Washington cuts it to like, what was it? I think it was like 20-13. And then Michigan puts that long drive together in the fourth quarter to make it 27-13. The offense had to come through. So you got to have both. And Notre Dame's offense has not been able to step up and play well in those moments. And that's where they got to get better. So I think it would help them make a run as long as the outshine doesn't come because the defense plays worse. That would be the only thing that that could help you in that situation. Christopher Crosby's got a couple of them here. He says, I was listening to Ryan's draft podcast, and he had an interesting take on Howard Cross. So buy, sell, hold. Within the defensive line rotation, Howard Cross should rotate to 3 technique at times. I'm going to sell it because you're saying should do it. I don't mind if they do it. I don't mind if they want to do some things where, there's times in a game where they want to put the number 2 nose guard in the game, Gabriel Rubio, and have Howard at 3 technique. I'm okay with that if they want to do that. I don't have anything wrong with that as long as they keep his snaps down. But should do it? I don't think that he should do it. I think Howard Cross was a pretty good at nose tackle the last couple of years, especially last season. And he provides something very different at that position than what Gabriel Rubio will provide when he's in the game as the number 2 and Sean Sevillano. The other thing, too, is Notre Dame does a lot of snaps. If you go back and watch the Ohio State game, Howard Cross doesn't spend a lot of time as a 3 technique in games. There will be snaps where he'll line up as a 3 technique, but there's a lot of snaps where Notre Dame has him in basically the 2 defensive tackles in two alignments, right? What does that mean? You've got a 3, a 1. Some people call it 2I. So 2I or 1, depending on who you are and how you label it. 2I or 1 means you're on the inside shade of the guard. A 3 technique means you're on the outside shade of the guard. And a 2 is head up on the guard. And there's a lot of snaps last year where Riley Mills and Howard Cross were both lined up in 2s over the guards. And then they would slant different ways. Sometimes Riley would slant in the A gap and Howard would go B. Sometimes they do a double slant in the A gap. Sometimes they do a twist out of that. So a lot of times Howard would go to the A gap and Riley would go to the B gap. So, there's plenty of times where Howard Cross attacked the B gap last year. Plenty of times. And those are no different than when he's playing, a 3 technique. So I don't think some team's going to be sitting there in the NFL draft and watching Howard Cross being like, gee, I don't know how he would handle playing 3 technique. I just don't know that the way that Notre Dame has used him over a 6-year period is going to leave you wondering that. But if there's some looks where they think they could benefit from having him and Rubio on the field together or him and Sevillano on the field together, all right, cool. Just as long as it doesn't mean, okay, he's normally playing 45 snaps and now we're going to play him 55 or 60 snaps a game because he's getting those looks, I wouldn't do that. But the reality is the type of player Riley Mills is and the type of player Howard Cross is, if there's certain games where you want to get, you want to get Howard Cross on the guard more often, they already do that with their 2 looks when they've got their head up looks with their 2 D tackles. And then at that point, it's okay. It's just, what's your call? We're going to make a call that's going to slant Howard here. Or you could just say, hey, look, for this series, Howard and Riley, you're going to flip, right? Riley, you're going to be nose and Howard's going to be 3. You could do that within a game if you want to. But I like the idea of having Howard Cross as your nose because he's so quick and he plays with such good pad level that he really did a great job last year of really occupying double teams in a different kind of manner. It's not anchoring in the A gap and taking on a double team and holding his ground, but it's more so he's splitting blocks. He's getting in the gaps, which forces the guard and the center to both kind of turn into him. Once they both turn into him, it's going to be impossible usually for those guards or center to get off that double team where they've turned in to then get hips back out and feet back out to the guard, to the linebacker who's slanting into the B gap or the D end who's slanting into the B gap. And so it's a different type of eating up blocks than if you're Lewis Nix or Sean Sevillano or a Gabriel Rubio, but it's occupying blockers in a way that's getting vertical, causing those linemen to take on and turn their hips, and then it's opening up gaps. Because if you're taking on a big physical guy, it can sometimes be easier for the center and guard in a double team to stay square and really power into that guy just because he's just sitting there eating up space. I can power and I can fight and I can claw, but I can relatively keep my hips square to the line of scrimmage. And then when that quick linebacker comes out, in the B gap, he comes on a twist or a stunt, or they do like an ET twist or a TN or an NT twist, which is nose first, tackle comes around, three technique comes around. If I got a big nose there, yeah, I'm going to be fighting with him, but I can better see, because I'm square, I can better see all that movement in front. If me and the center are working on blocking Howard Cross and he shoots that gap and he starts to beat the center or he starts to beat me, then I now have to turn my hips to take him on and try to hold him off. Or I have to anchor inside and work to keep him from splitting that double team. And so once I turn my hips, it's going to be a lot harder for me when Drake Bowen or Jack Kaiser or Kingston or Jalen Sneed or whoever else is now flying through that B gap, or RJ Oben is slanting inside into the B gap really hard. It's going to be a lot harder to contain that. And that's why a lot of times last year, you'd see Javonte Jean-Baptiste shooting into the B gap and making a play. You're like, why didn't they block Javonte Jean-Baptiste? Because Notre Dame was having Howard Cross attack that A gap, right, in their underfronts, which means the nose is to the strong side. He'd attack those A gaps, get that guard and center both occupied, and then Javonte would kind of do a quick slant inside the tackle. Well, that's going to be a lot more effective for him because he's not going to get that guard help. The tackle's not going to get that guard help, where if I'm a guard and I'm handling a double team, as I said, and my shoulders are square, and I see that defensive end coming on a quick slant, I can maybe get an arm out. I can kind of come off that double team, get to him. But as soon as I got my hips, I have zero chance against any kind of decent defensive end on a slant like that. So you go back and watch film, you'll see a lot of times where Howard Cross is eating up a double team as Javonte Jean-Baptiste was slanting inside. I don't know that Riley Mills or other guys are going to occupy double teams in the same manner, which then can maybe limit some of your stuff. So I really like the way that they use him there. And I think it's very effective that way. So I would not do a whole lot to change that. There might be certain game plan situations where I want to, get him lined up on a guard on an outside technique, maybe have him attacking, with a little bit more width away from the A gap. You can easily make that adjustment if the game plan calls for that. But it's not trying to get him more work for the NFL. It's just, I think that gives us the best chance to win that game. Christopher Crosby also with another one, buy, sell, hold. Alabama is going to win the SEC regular season title on their way to the SEC championship game. Their schedule seems far more manageable than Texas or Georgia's. Let's look at that. So let's go to the Alabama 2024 schedule. I know for one, as I'm pulling this up, I know they get Georgia at home. So when you look at Alabama, they get Georgia at home. Let's just say they win that. They have to play at Vanderbilt. It's a win. Home against South Carolina. It's a win. They get Missouri at home. Should be a win. They get Mercer at home. Should be a win. Okay, that's a non-conference game. And then they get Auburn at home in the Iron Bowl. Should be a win. So what are their road games? They play at Tennessee, they play at LSU, and they play at Oklahoma. Those are not easy games. Those are not easy games at all. Tennessee is going to be, I think, a much improved team this year. I think Nico going into year 2, he got some really good experience last year off the bench. And then, of course, he got a chance to start the bowl game against Iowa, handled himself well against a really good defense. They got a pretty good run game situation. Your offensive line should be okay. You've got good weapons on the perimeter. Your defense has one of the best edge players in the country coming back. They lost some guys in the portal. But honestly, what I've seen from those kids and how they've handled the portal, you may have a better chemistry now in your locker room. There's some talented younger players that are coming along. That's not going to be an easy game. That's not going to be an easy game at all, playing Tennessee on the road. And that comes after, you've got Georgia, Vandy, South Carolina consecutively, and you got Missouri coming up the next week. And then also at LSU, look, I mean, LSU's played Bama tough the last 2 years. LSU beat Bama 2 years ago in a great game at home. And then last year, it was a competitive game for a while. And then obviously Alabama ran away with it in the second half. They started to run away with it before Jaden Daniels got knocked out of the game. But, that obviously helped them really cement that win last season. But it was a competitive game for a while. And so, of course, LSU's not going to have Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas and Jaden Daniels, but they're still going to have a You guys have a talented football team, and I don't think their defense is going to be that good, but I don't think their defense is going to necessarily be as trash as it was last year. I mean, it was just terrible last year. It's just really, really bad. And for the record, it was 28-21 after LSU scored. It was 21-21 at halftime, the LSU-Bama game. So, and then LSU took a 28-21 lead in the third quarter. And Bama starts to pull away, and then Jaden gets hurt, and then the fourth quarter they kind of put it away. But it was a competitive game for a while. Bama went up 14. LSU scored first. Bama scored 2 in a row, take the lead. LSU tied it up. Bama took the lead back. LSU tied it up with 5 seconds left in the half. Then LSU starts the second half with a touchdown drive right out of the gate. So it was a really good back and forth game. And then, of course, in 2022, LSU beat them. So I look at that too. And then last year, Tennessee, even as good as Bama was last year, Tennessee had a 20-17 lead on Alabama in the fourth quarter. Matter of fact, they had a 20-7 halftime lead on Alabama at Alabama last year. And then obviously Alabama pulled away in the second half, took a 27-20 lead, and then on the next possession, Tennessee fumbled it, and Alabama took it back for a touchdown, and that was the end of the game. But Tennessee had a lead, almost a 2-touchdown lead over them at halftime. And then the year before, Tennessee beat Alabama in 2023. So this is what they did with Saban. So, I mean, I'm not sitting there acting like, oh, Bama's going to fall off now that Nick Saban has arrived. No, I mean, now that Nick Saban's gone, I just pointed to 2 good teams that both are 1-1 against Bama the last 2 years with Saban. And you got to go play both of them on the road. I don't think that's going to necessarily be that easy. And then they also have to play at Oklahoma. Now, right now, that should be a win for Bama. I don't see a scenario in which Oklahoma is going to be able to beat Bama. But look, it's end of the year. It's on the road. They will have just be coming off 2 weeks removed from playing at LSU. They got the Iron Bowl coming up. That's not an easy game either. So is their schedule as hard as Bama's? No, it's not. I mean, is Georgia's? No, it's not. But is it a cakewalk? No, it's not. I mean, Georgia in the conference, they have to play at Bama, at Texas, at Ole Miss. They get Tennessee at home, Florida neutral field. They don't have to play Oklahoma. Georgia doesn't have to play LSU. Their schedule is going to be challenging, very, very, very challenging. And I think Bama's is easier, but I don't think it's significantly so. And then you look at Texas's schedule, and Texas in the conference game, they get Oklahoma on a neutral field. They get Georgia at home. They get Florida at home. They get Kentucky at home. They get Mississippi State at home. They got to play at A&M, at Arkansas, at Vanderbilt. So the only tough non-conference game that Texas plays is like on the road is what, Texas A&M? They play Oklahoma on a neutral field. Now, they play at Michigan. So if you look at the whole schedule, you could argue that Georgia's whole schedule is tough, or Texas' whole schedule is tougher because they play at Michigan in the non-conference. But the Michigan game in the non-conference has nothing to do with who plays in the SEC title game. So I think Texas of the 3 actually has the easier schedule. So if you look at Texas, I mean, they got to play. They get Georgia. They don't got to play Bama. They get Georgia at home. They don't have to play Ole Miss. They don't have to play LSU. I mean, they don't have to play Tennessee. The only really tough teams they play are obviously Oklahoma, but Georgia at home and then at A&M. And who knows what A&M is going to be by then? They could be really good. They get Kentucky at home. That's going to be a quality team, but they get them at home. So I actually think Texas has the easiest path. So I'm gonna sell that because I'm not predicting Alabama to make the SEC title game. I certainly think they can, but I don't think it would necessarily be because it's more manageable than Texas's schedule. I think it's just because they're going to be the better team. And my hesitation with Bama right now is I think Bama's going to still have a very talented roster, but I just worry about how that roster is going to adjust to Kalen DeBoer's offense. I think it could adjust. I just need to see it. That's really where I'm at. Floating Irish with this buy so hold. Notre Dame goes undefeated in the regular season and wins at least one game in the playoffs. 2 or more coaches on the staff get head coaching jobs. So if Notre Dame goes to the playoff and wins a game, 2 or more coaches on the staff get head coaching jobs. I'm going to sell that. I don't know if getting to the quarterfinals is going to be something that makes Notre Dame staff be the point where it's like, oh my gosh, we have to raid Notre Dame staff. If you were to give me one more win, I might be willing to buy that. I might be willing to buy that with one more win. One more win, you know. Well, let me say this, because you said undefeated in the regular season, so that would make them a 5 seed. They beat the 12 seed, and then losing the quarterfinals to a team that's going to be ranked lower than them at the end of the regular season. I don't think that's the kind of thing that, I mean, it'd be a heck of a season. It'd be a little disappointing end, to be honest with you. And I don't know if that would be the kind of thing that is going to make the committee say, or make other schools say, wow, we've got to raid Notre Dame staff for head coaches. If you were to tell me that Notre Dame goes undefeated, wins the first 2 games, and is competitive in the semifinals, even if they lose, then I might be more prone to buy this. But I'm going to sell this for now. I'm going to sell that for now. And then the next one from Floating Irish, he says Notre Dame defense will have 20 interceptions this season. So again, just a reminder, when I get questions like this, I always anticipate them being 12 plus 1. So if Notre Dame plays 15, 16 games, and the answer is easy and it's not as impressive. So regular season plus the bowl game, will they have 20 interceptions? I'm going to buy that. I'm going to buy that. They had 16 last year, and they had a lot of dropped interceptions last year. They should have had more than that. They had 10 the year before, 15 in 2021, only 7 in 2020, 9 in 2019, 12 in 2018, 10 in 2017, 8 in 2016, 9 in 2015, 16 in 2014, 13 in 2013, 16 in 2012. So why am I predicting that Notre Dame, who's never really sniffed 20 interceptions, is going to have that many this year? It's because I think a couple things. Okay, and here's why I'm buying this. And because it's a lot. It's a lot of interceptions, and it's certainly something that Notre Dame hasn't done in a while. But why am I selling it? Well, why am I buying it? Well, the reason is a couple things. Number one, 20 interceptions, just for context, would have tied Notre Dame last year for the national, or second in the national nation, right? The year before, only 2 teams had 20 or more. The year before that, only 2 teams had 20 or more. The year before that, 2020, nobody did. 2 in 19, 3 in 18. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in 2017. So it's not something teams do a whole lot. But the reason I think Notre Dame does that this year is a couple reasons. Okay, number one, it's only a jump of 4 from last year. I mean, DJ Brown had 2 potential interceptions he should have caught in the Ohio State game alone. The quarterback play that Notre Dame's going to face this year is the softest it's been since probably 2020, in my opinion. That's number one. Number 2, I think the pass rush is going to be even better this year. That's a big part of it. I think the better your pass rush is, the better chance you have at intercepting a lot of passes. I absolutely believe that to be true. I think if you're a team that can really get after the quarterback, you can ramp that up. I wholeheartedly believe that. The second part of it is, I think when you look at how the defense plays, the combination of being a better pass rush team with how much Al Golden disguises coverages. And if you read the article I wrote from Marcus Freeman a couple weeks ago about how he expects the defense to be even better this year, a lot of it was, now that a lot of these guys are going into year 2 and year 3 of the defense, we're not going to add a lot of new stuff, but we can change, looking at it from the coaching standpoint. This is what he said. I'm not saying I don't coach Notre Dame, but this is what he said. We can do more disguising of things. Well, if your pass rush is really good and you're a long athletic team, which Notre Dame will be next year, and you're disguising a lot of coverages against a schedule that doesn't have a lot of great quarterbacks, you're gonna force a lot of turnovers, in my opinion, number one. And then the second, it'd be the third piece of this, is I think the offense is going to be a lot better for Notre Dame. And when you're jumping out to more big leads, this is partly why they had so many interceptions last year. When you jump out to big leads, teams have to throw more. And when teams have to throw more, then you've got more opportunities for interceptions. So when you look at Notre Dame last year and you look at the number of attempts that they faced, Notre Dame ranked, let me pull this up here real quick. Last year, Notre Dame ranked 45th in pass attempts against, fewest pass attempts. So that's actually pretty high for a team that won 10 games and threw the ball and had as many blowouts as Notre Dame had. I mean, when you look at the teams that were underneath them, I'm looking for a good team that had fewer pass attempts against them. You'd probably say Georgia Tech's the best so far. Northwestern, maybe the best so far. I'm going through Penn State. Penn State at 19. That's the only really good team that had fewer passes against them last year. And part of that is because they played in the Big Ten. Most of the teams that had fewer pass attempts against them last year were teams that weren't very good, which means teams had leads on them. And so that gave Notre Dame a chance to have more interceptions, or have fewer interceptions. So if you actually look at where they were last year from a pass attempt standpoint and the number of interceptions they had, it's a lot. So for example, Liberty led the nation in interceptions last year. In 14 games, they had 21 picks. They had 507 pass attempts against them last year. 507. That's a lot of interceptions. And when you look at the other team that had over 20, Oklahoma, they had 474 pass attempts. So if you look at like the rankings for last year, Oklahoma or Liberty ranked 132nd in most pass attempts against them. Oklahoma ranked 127th in pass attempts against them. Notre Dame ranked 45th. Imagine if you add 100 more pass attempts against Notre Dame this year. If you look at the rate in which they had interceptions last year, so they had 16 picks on 372 pass attempts. If you had, let me see here real quick. So you had 16 picks divided by 372 pass attempts, and then multiply that times 472 pass attempts, that's 20 interceptions. So if they are getting thrown on against as much as teams did last year, the good teams did last year, then they're going to have a lot more interceptions. And then that's partly because of the offense being better. Then if you get into a situation where the defense is also more disruptive and you're a little longer, a little better at safety, then I think all those things add up to where Notre Dame's going to get 4 more interceptions than they did last year. It's not a lot. I think that's certainly going to factor into that. So I'm going to buy that. It's a good one. Zibby's Boxing Gloves, buy, sell, hold. One of Notre Dame, Oregon, Texas, or Florida State wins a national championship before Alabama wins another one. I'll buy that. I mean, look, I've said this. I've said how many times recently have I said in this format, because I keep getting asked different ways about it, that I believe Notre Dame's going to win a title in the next 3 years. I just believe that. I could be wrong. I'm not betting my mortgage on it. I'm not betting somebody my house on it. Hey, if I'm wrong, you can have my house. I'm not doing that. But I just think that they will. I think they've got the talent. I think they're recruiting at a high level. I just think there's a lot of things working in their favor. And you could say the same thing about Oregon. I mean, Oregon's a red-hot program right now under Dan Lanning. They've been better the last 2 years and win-loss-wise than Notre Dame has. I would say that their schedule was benefited by not being overly tough, but they didn't lose to Stanford last 2 years. Notre Dame did. They didn't lose to Marshall last 2 years. Notre Dame did. So, I mean, I put Oregon in that conversation. I mean, Texas is recruiting at a high level. I don't think Florida State's a team that's going to be built for winning a championship. I just don't. And I think all this crap that their school is doing with the, potentially leaving it, that's a major distraction for the football team, in my opinion. They can say, hey, we don't worry about that, but it's a distraction. I don't care what anybody says. This is a distraction. And so I don't think Texas is a team or Florida State's a team that's poised to win a title, but I could see Notre Dame, Oregon, or Texas all winning a title in the next 2 to 3 years, and I don't know that Bama is going to be poised for that. They could. I'm not saying Bama won't win one, but I don't have them. They're going to be much better than people think. I don't know that they're going to be that good because they weren't even that good in the last few years of Nick Saban. Hesburgh Mafia, buy, sell, or hold. Coach D starts repping the Denver Broncos again this year and rocks an estimate jersey to one podcast this season. All right. So first of all, could I end up getting back to the Broncos? I guess. Like I don't know that I'm really all that fired up about watching a whole lot of NFL this year for a number of reasons, and maybe the Broncos are better than I expect, and I go out there and I miss being a Broncos fan. Guys, I didn't watch much Broncos games last year, and so maybe they're better than I expect, and Bo Nix is the real deal and all that kind of stuff, and they once I get out, they pull me back. I could see that. I've been a Broncos fan for 40 years. And so I could see myself kind of getting back to repping the Broncos. The rocking the Estime jersey, that's not happening. Look, I have not worn a jersey of another human being since I was in high school. And the only reason I wore them back then is because they matched outfits. Like that's kind of how I dressed, right? So like they'd match hats. I had a North Carolina jersey, and I'm trying to remember what the name of the quarterback was. It was a number 15 jersey. Let me look this up. Let me see this. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to remember the name of the coach. Chris something, I believe. I'm trying to remember the name of the quarterback. It was not Mike Thomas. So let's go to 96. Chris Keldorf is the number 15 jersey that I had. He was the quarterback for them. He was okay, but I just liked the jersey and matched some hats I had. So it was a cool outfit. And then I had a Tom Brady jersey. And this is back in no, it wasn't Tom Brady jersey. It'd have been a Drew Bledsoe jersey, right? Wouldn't it have been about? Yeah, I think it would have been a Drew Bledsoe jersey. So let me go look. Yeah, I think I had a Patriots jersey. That's the moral of the story. I had a Patriots jersey, but I believe it was. Yeah, it was I think it would have been a Drew Bledsoe jersey actually. And again, the reason I liked it is I like the color combination, and it matched some hats I had. That's pretty much why I wore those jerseys. I wore a John Elway jersey occasionally. Like that's the only jersey I've ever worn as like a fan. So I'm not really I'm not a jersey wearing kind of guy. And I don't dress like that anymore. I don't dress to match and look good. I mean, if I go out to dinner, my wife and I'm throwing on something IB related and we're going out. And if we go somewhere nice, I throw an IB polo and an IB pullover and I go that way. I don't really dress up a whole lot. I still dress. I mean, I wear jeans and a hoodie is my favorite thing to wear. Now, I'll say this. If like Audric Estime sent me a jersey and was like, hey, rock my jersey, okay, I'd wear it during a show. But I mean, that would just be out of respect to Audric, but I'm not going out and buying anybody's jersey. And I'm certainly not going to wear it on the show. So I'm going to sell that because I'm not going to be rocking on a show. That's just not, unless they send it to me. And then I'd rock it and I'd give them love for it. But that's it. That's the only way I'm doing it. Coleman Smith, buy sell. We got several of them here from my guy Coleman, who's in the chat right now. So Coleman Smith said, number 1, buy, sell, hold. Drake Bowen and Kingston Viliama-Asa will be starting together by the end of the season. Well, barring injury, I'm selling that. And the reason I'm selling that is because I think Jack Kaiser is going to be a really good football player for Notre Dame this year. And I think Kingston's going to have a very good freshman year. And I think Kingston's going to play a lot. But the only way to me this happens is if Jack gets hurt. That's the only way I see that happening. Could Jack struggle to adjust to will? It's possible. But I've pointed out how good Jack Kaiser was last year. And I think he's going to have a really good senior season. I do. So unless he gets hurt, I don't see this one happening. Now, if you were to say next year, Drake Bowen and Kingston will start together next year, I'd buy that because Jack's going to be gone. But for this season, an injury would have to happen. Buy, sell, hold number 2. Notre Dame is not done at safety, even if Brandon Logan commits in the 2025 class. I'm going to sell that. There's no need for Notre Dame to get a 4th safety in this class. None. You're going to have, if they get Brandon Logan, which they're trying to do, you'd have 3 safeties and 3 corners. You signed 3 safeties and 2 corners the year before, and you signed 3 safeties and 2 corners the year before that. One of the corners is gone, and I believe all 3 safeties are still there. Adon, Minnick, and Luke Talich. So, yes, they're all 3 there. There is no need to go to a 4th safety. So, I'm going to sell that. And then buy, sell, hold number 3. The new super conference landscape of college football will crumble in 5 to 7 years. I'm going to buy that, but I'm going to buy that because it's what I want to happen, Coleman. It's what I want to happen. I hate this new super conference push that they're going towards. Florida State and Clemson trying to get out of the ACC. If that happens, you're going to see other teams jump out. There's rumblings that they're going to go to the Big 12 and the ACC is going to die and all this. And I hate it. I absolutely hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. Unfortunately, if I'm being practical of what I think is going to happen, I'd have to sell it. But I'm going to buy it because I want it to happen. I hate this. I hate it. I hate it. Here's what would have to happen for it to crumble. Essentially, what would have to happen is these television companies just lose too much revenue in other areas and in just different market things to where they just can't afford to do it anymore. And the result of them not being able to afford to do it anymore would be where you would then have a chance to kind of go to what I've always wanted, which is take the Power 5, Power 4 leagues, go back, and take all those teams. What's it, 65 to 70 teams? Get some of the new teams in. That's fine. I think the number now is like, what's it, like 68, 70, something like that. I'd have to look up the number and go back to a situation where those schools you can negotiate with TV deals, right? And get whatever TV deals you want. And if the CBS or, if ESPN wants to pay a mess of money for, Notre Dame or, anybody else and, or the SEC or ESPN wants to pay for the SEC and Fox wants to pay for Notre Dame and NBC wants to pay for the Big Ten, you get to bid for your right to host Big Ten games. You get to bid for your right to have Notre Dame. You get to bid for your right to have the Big 12 or whatever. But that total money goes into a pool that gets distributed evenly to all the programs. So the TV companies are giving that money, that higher value to get that team on their channel. But in the college football world, which it would have to kind of be run differently than the NCAA right now, that money goes into a pool. And there's some advantages to that. Number one is it evens up the revenue share. And if you even up the revenue share, then there's no need for all this jumping leagues crap. If that happens, what you might see, and what I hope you would see, is for teams to go back to the old conferences. So you'd see the ACC would go back to being somewhat what it was. The Southwestern Conference would kind of come back. The Big 8 would come back, probably be the Big 12, because you'd see some independents would want to stay in leagues. You'd see the Big East potentially come back. The Big 10 would go back to being a 10 to 12 team league. The Pac-10 to Pac-12 would come back. Thered be a lot of advantages. Now, some of those leagues are going to be a little bigger than they used to be. So you may see, you say me, where's Utah going to go? Okay, they're going to go back to the Pac-12. They're going to, what are they going to do? I don't know what they're going to do, but it would work out. And then what that also does is that then helps make it a little bit easier to then distribute the revenue share amongst teams for paying players. You say, look, every team's going to have this amount. Every team's going to have the same amount of TV money. Every team's going to have the same amount of money that they have to pay players, and go about it that way. I think that would be the dream scenario. And I'm very much against the whole everyone's independent. I think that's not practical. I think that's kind of silly. I think that's an oversimplification of what I know the idea that Chip Kelly's trying to push. I just think it's the wrong. It's the wrong way to get to the right end. The right end is because basically his thing was, you have conferences for all the other sports, but football, everyone's independent. You can create whatever schedules you want. I don't like that. What I would like to see happen, again, is stay in your conferences, but go back to the old conferences where the conferences are smaller. If some teams want to be independent, they can choose to be independent. So maybe Florida State says, we don't want to be in the ACC. We want to get back to the way it used to be, so we'll be independent for football. And if you want to do that, you can do that. But what you would then do is you'd have to say, okay, we're going to do that. And, if you get the smaller leagues, you've got fewer conference games. You can, change things up a little bit. That's going to create more of the national games, which is what Chip Kelly was talking about. You're kind of forced to do this. So those are all things that I think would work to make scheduling better. And then now all of a sudden your other sports are in better situations. I don't think you need to have everyone be independent to have this work. I just don't think that's practical. And the other thing too is if you make everyone independent, then you're only going to have 12 to 14 teams playing for something. I don't think that's good for the game. I want kids playing for conference championships. That adds more value to the regular season. It makes there's, look, hey, we may not be going to the playoff, but we can have a chance to go win the conference or maybe upset someone else's chances to win the conference. You need to have something to play for. And if we're pissed about the league changes, getting rid of old regional rivalries, the easiest way to kill that is to do what Chip Kelly wants to do. So again, I like what he's trying to accomplish. I think that's just really the wrong way to get there. The way you want to get there is to create a revenue share where all the Power 5 teams get the same amount of money and they go back to the old leagues. That's the way to do it. So fewer teams in leagues. Maybe even you start a new league. Maybe Notre Dame says, hey, we're going to be independent, and the independent is a league. You know what I mean? Like we play each other in sport and other sports. Like it's an independent, it's not a conference, but it's an independent league where you're agreeing to play in all your sports or something like that, or at least some regional. I mean, there's a lot of different things you could do. I don't think everyone being independent really helps. I think it's a bad idea. I think if there was an equal revenue stream, what you would see is going back, because the only reason the Southwest Conference and the Big Eight and the Big East and all, the only reason all those teams, all those leagues folded primarily was because of TV money. That's why the Big East went away. It's because they were chasing football dollars, and a bunch of teams started going to the ACC for football dollars. That's why it ended. If you don't need to chase football dollars anymore, then there's no need to leave the Big East. There's no need to leave the ACC. There's no need to leave the Southwest Conference. There's no need to leave the Big Eight. And that's kind of where I'm at. So I'm gonna buy that because I want it to happen. We did have a super chat from my guy DK. Thank you very, very much. By so hold, history needs to be removed as a class for our children. I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Show them all the beauty they have inside. Give them a sense of pride. I think okay, it's really funny. I see the song that you're doing there. I believe the children of the future. I remember that song. I think that's a horrible suggestion to remove history. I think, if anything, history needs to be added back into the curriculum more. I think there are far too many kids in our society that don't understand our founding periods. There are far too many people. Like, I hear the word Nazi thrown around for like anyone you don't like politically. And it's because people don't actually have a clue of what that actually means and the hatefulness behind it and what they stood for. And so it's just become a term for someone you don't like. I think that people don't understand why the Roman Empire fell. They don't understand, what led to all of the wonderful our lack of understanding of history is why so many aspects of our society are headed for major problems, because we have no concept of how we got here. And so I think that history gives tremendous context for who we are as a people. It gives tremendous context for, how we've come to be so extravagant in so many things that we have. So I am 1,000% against the idea of getting rid of history. And so I'm a big fan of it. And I don't care if he's trolling me or not. You asked the question, I'm going to answer it. Okay. So I think history, because the other reason I'm answering it is because there is a push for that going on right now. There is a push in academia for history to be taught less or to be removed. I think if I was governor of Indiana, and I wish we had a good governor, and we don't, and the next governor is not going to be very good, unfortunately, no matter who wins. We don't have a good governor right now. But if I was governor, the first thing that I would implement in my state curriculum is every student has to take at least 2 civics classes, and that are geared towards understanding our Constitution and our founding period, good and bad. These are not classes meant to build up our founders as these perfect humans who did no wrong. It's not that. It's, let's talk about this period. Let's talk about the good. Let's talk about the bad, but let's talk about this great ideal that led to this nation and why we do the things that we do. And that's going to lead into some really interesting conversations about, well, yeah, you were all about freedom, but what about this? You were into this, but what about this? People that get upset about, well, only wealthy owners could vote. Okay, well, you can agree or not agree with that, but let's at least understand why that was. And so I think if we understood that, we would have so many more fruitful and productive conversations. And I think that needs to be something that's ramped up. At least 2 years of civics and studying our founding documents and our founding period. I think that should be mandatory reading and mandatory studying for every student, everyone. And so that would absolutely be in my required curriculum. Like, you can't graduate high school without taking these classes. And then, of course, you have to be careful and you have to make sure that you dictate the type of criteria and the type of structure it's going to be, because then you're going to have some people that are in either direction are going to teach it sway slanted in their direction, right? So, people that lean farther to the right are going to teach it a certain way. People that lean further to the left are going to teach it a certain way. I'm not interested in all that crap, okay? I'm interested in looking at it from a standpoint of, we are just teaching history, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. And then we'll debate it, discuss it, and all those type of things. So that's kind of where I'm at. I would very, very much, I think that should be demanded and required. Absolutely. Absolutely. History should absolutely be taught more. So, John Keevers, are you saying my take is wild? Or are you saying the take that history should not be taught is wild? Because I thought you were saying my take on history was wild, but then your next comment is, need to know our mistakes from past or they will repeat. I agree with that. So I'm a little confused by your first take on that one. So we will see. Yeah, and John A1 says history is important, but the approach to teaching the history has been heavily spun. That's exactly what I'm saying. Like, more governors need to be taking control of that and teaching things in a way that, hey, we're going to talk about the real history. And I think that's something we should do more and more and more. So, okay, we're on the same page then, John. We're good. John Keevers, good to know. JP is for Notre Dame. My guy, JP Buellsfeld, buy, sell, or hold. I love this question, by the way. If the Notre Dame Leprechaun went head-to-head with the 12 mascots on our 2004 schedule in a boxing ring, the Leprechaun would go at least 6-6. So I love this question, John. So let's pull up the schedule and go through it one by one. So first of all, I got to know what the heck an Aggie is. Okay, so I gotta. So is it like agriculture? Is an Aggie like a farm person? Okay, I'm gonna take the Leprechaun there, I guess. I'm not quite sure. Let's say just give him that one, right? Okay. The Leprechaun versus a Husky. I don't know how I feel about that one. I'm not sure I feel good about that one. The Leprechaun against the Boilermaker. That's a pretty tough dude, right? Their mascot's like this guy that's, working on trains and this big old dude. And, I don't know if I feel good about the Leprechaun in that one. So right now I'm going 1 and 2. A Red Hawk. All right. I mean, I got you against a bird. Okay. I got you against a bird. You're 2 and 2. The Cardinal, right? The bird. I got you 3 and 2. Okay. There's a Cardinal. It's actually pretty cool. There's a Cardinal there's a couple Cardinals actually that kind of live in our backyard, and they're always on our fences and our trees. And my wife said she saw a baby one recently. But if it came to it, I'm in a boxing ring. I'm taking the Cardinal. Okay, I'm going to win that one. Okay, so we'll go 4 and 2 now, right? Or 4 say 4 and 3, 3 and 3, or 2 and 3, right? So 3 and 2. Beat the Aggie, beat the Red Hawk, beat the Cardinals, lose to the Huskies, lose to the Boilermakers. I'm taking a Cardinal against a tree. I'm bringing my axe with me in the boxing ring, and I'm chopping the tree down. And plus, their mascot has no arms, and I don't know how he's going to win that one if he has no arms. So that's 4 and 2. So you're looking pretty good right here now. Add a Yellow Jacket. Okay, unless you're allergic to bees, I'm taking the Leprechaun against the bees. So that's 5 and 2. A Midshipman. Okay, I'm not quite sure how to look at that one because what type of midshipman, right? I mean, is let me see if there's actually a definition for what a midshipman is. A naval cadet in the U.S. Navy. Um, I mean, uh, are you a naval cadet that eventually wants to be a SEAL, or are you a naval cadet who's cooking dinner? I guess it would depend on what kind of midshipman we're talking about here, right? And I know that a lot of the midshipmen that play on the football team are actually Marines. They're in the Marine officer category. So I don't know how I feel about that one. So I'm going to give an L to the leprechaun in that one. Okay, Seminole. Nah, that's an L. I'm sorry, love you, Leprechaun, but you're catching L against the Seminoles. The Cavaliers, those cats have swords. That's an L. Okay, Black Knights, again, they got swords. USC Trojans, I mean, okay, probably lose, but as we found out, at least through, I don't know if it's real history, but at least through Homer's depiction of the Trojans, they can be uh, sort of tricked, right, into victory. So I'm going to say the leprechaun, because the leprechaun by nature is very mischievous, very sneaky. Anyone that's ever watched Darby O'Gill and the Little People knows, right? They can be very sneaky. And so I'm going to say they're going to outsmart the Trojans the way that the Greeks did, and they're going to win that one. So they'll go 6-6. So that was pretty fun. I'm not spinning it, man. Hey, Coleman, it's about knowing your history, right? And Trojans can be duped. That's why we don't. There aren't any more Trojans left. And again, I watched Darby O'Gill and the Little People. If you haven't seen it, it's an old movie with Sean Connery. They're very mischievous, right? So we're gonna go 6-6. That's what we're gonna do. So yeah. so there, there you go. That's a good one, JP. I appreciate that, man. Peruvian Iris with a super chat. The revenue share plan being mandated in the next several years will not change the needs for collectives and large individual NIL deals, primarily for depth of roster competitive advantages. Well, like the rev share is not meant to replace NIL. So I'm going to buy that. Yeah, it was not meant to replace it. And then your next one is large upfront guaranteed payments for specific positions will continue in the short term, get crazy out of hand, and become a crisis before any solution is found. Programs can't help themselves, become desperate, and will spend until some sort of rules are imposed. Well, I'm buying it for the most part. I don't think they're going to actually set any rules because I just think the NCAA, as long as the NCAA is running things, they're just a bunch of cowards. They have no interest in actually setting rules that people have to follow in that regard. I think that there should be things that are put in place to kind of get it from getting out of hand. But look, if they would just even if they made it righteous, right? Which is, look, we're getting rid of pay for play. You can't just give guys money to commit. You can't just give guys money to sign. You're not giving guys money to take visits, which is rampant now in college football. You just have to pay. You have to give kids thousands of dollars just to get them to come to visit you, which is nuts. Get rid of all that stuff and say, look, you can have deals, legitimate NIL deals in place when the kids arrive. You're not just giving them money to sign and money to commit. Here's $500,000 to commit. Boom. What there's no attachments, there's no NIL. That's not NIL, that's just pay for play. NIL is meant to be a thing where you're going to take advantage of your name, image, and likeness to create deals and partnerships with companies and different things for you. That's what, to me, it's meant to be. If you do that, you're still going to create bigger deals for certain players. And that's okay. If I'm at Notre Dame, right? And I've got this big time quarterback I want to sign, big time D end I want to sign. And I get with companies that work with us and work with our players. And I get some of the big donors that we have who have business say, hey, look, let's put this package together for this young man. We're going to need him to be involved in the community, do some advertising stuff for us, do things on his social media to promote our company, all those different types of things. Then we're going to get him this amount of dollars. I don't think there's anything wrong with that because he's going to trade his name, image, and likeness, right? So he's going to agree to do certain things for you and then you're going to pay him X amount of dollars. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Just handing the kid $500,000, and the only thing he has to do in return is sign on the dotted line and play for your school is not what NIL is all about. But here's the deal. If you did what I did, you're still going to have schools giving kids money under the table. That's been going on for decades, and that's not going to stop. But boosters are still going to do those things, and it's just not going to stop. It's just going to go back to being under the table in those regards. All right. It did this to me last time. And so now it's doing it to me again. So it's not letting me. Give me a second. Okay. Okay. We're back up and rolling. Reese's and Pieces has 3 super chats, or excuse me, not super chats, buy so holds. Number 1, outside of Oregon and Ohio State, the Big Ten won't have a team with a total offense within the top 30. Well, number 1, I would have to know what you mean by total offense. Are you talking scoring offense? Are you talking efficiency? Are you talking total offense? I would have to know a little bit more about that. But even then, I'm still probably going to sell. I've said this before. I think Penn State's going to be better on offense this year. Are they going to be a team that ranks in the top 10? No, I'm not saying that. But last year, Penn State ranked 12th in scoring offense, and they weren't very good on offense. And I think that they're going to be better this year because I think they're going to run the ball better this year. And I think they got a much better offensive coordinator this year. So I think that's going to help them a ton. Last year, Penn State, let's see here, yards per game, they were only 55th. Yards per play, they ranked 75th. So, yeah, they weren't great on offense last year from a yard standpoint, but they ranked 12th in scoring. And I think they're going to be a better team. I think they've got a shot to be in the top 30. I believe that Washington should still have a chance to be a top 30 team on offense. I mean, I know that Washington had some big losses, right? There's no doubt. I mean, they're not going to be nearly as good as they were last year, but they're still going to have a team that's capable of going out and scoring some points. And, I think they're going to be a team. Will Rogers is not a great football player, but Will Rogers is going to have a lot of good talent around him. And he's going to be part of a team that's going to be able to have some skill players around him. I mean, so you look at your quarterback. Let's see who they got. Will Rogers, a quarterback. Let me pull up there. Let me find a depth chart real quick. I think my magazines are upstairs. So let me just try to pull up a depth chart here real quick. Okay. So let's project their depth chart at receiver right here. So they've got Denzel Boston, who's a guy that came back as part of their team last year. Got Jeremiah Hunter, who transferred from Cal. I'm a big fan of Jeremiah Hunter. You guys know I've talked about him. They got Giles Jackson, who transferred from Michigan a couple years ago. And they got some younger players. So they've got some talent. Got a kid that transferred in from Arizona that knows the offense. So they've got talent there. They're going to have some talent there. And so I could see them still being top 30 on offense. I'm not saying that they're going to be as dynamic as last year, but I mean, think about where they were last year, though, right? Like last year in total offense, they ranked 12th in the country in total offense. And they ranked 8th in the country in yards per play. They ranked, 13th in the country in points per game. And that's partly because of the end of the year game against Michigan. So they're going to go from like top 10 to 12 to outside the top 30 against Big Ten athletes. I don't think they're going to fall that far. So I'm going to sell that one. I think there'll be more than 2 in the top 30. Now, if you just said top 20, we might be talking here. We might be talking here, but top 30, I think there's going to be at least 1. Number 2, there are at minimum, there are at minimum 3 regular season matches in the playoffs. I'm going to sell that. I don't think there's going to be that many rematches. I don't. I think a couple, but I don't think there's going to be 3. I'm going to sell that. That could be wishful thinking, but I'm going to sell that. Number 3, Jeremiah Love leads all football FBS running backs in receiving yards and touchdowns. I'm going to sell that too. There are just some offenses that are going to have their running backs just catch a lot more yards than what Notre Dame is going to have their running back do. And while I think he's going to have a very productive season this year, I just think that there's just going to be somebody's, one of those air raid teams is going to have their running back catch more balls. I just think that's going to be the case. Now, is this a crazy thought? Absolutely not. I mean, it's not a crazy thought at all. I just don't think he's going to have that many yards to where no running back in college football is going to have more. I don't believe. I'm actually trying to look and see what the leading running back was last year in receiving yards. So I'm actually pulling that up now. So if you give me a second. So last year, the leading pass catcher, because I may change my mind once I look at the actual number from last season, but I don't think that I am. So we're looking at receiving yards. So going down to next page. Just give me a second here. I'm going to find it. This thing is loading very slowly. So let's see here. Tight end. Looking for some non-running backs here. Still none so far. So I just went through the top 200, and then so it ends with 530 yards, and I don't see anybody. I don't see any running backs in there, at least that I could see. I might have skipped over some, but it's possible. I'm going to sell it because that's just a lot of yards. I think it's going to have to get you at least 400 yards receiving. But we'll see. I like the thought, though. I hope you're right. T-Knack. If Keon Keeley, Peyton Bowen, and Ivan Taylor remained in their respective classes, Notre Dame would have the number 1 ranked defense in 2026. Sure, I'll buy that because I think Notre Dame has a chance to have a really, really good defense in 25 and 26. Well, actually, you know what? I'm going to sell that because I don't know that they would all – well, I'll still buy it. Here's the thing. 26 means 23, 24, 25, 26. That'd be Keon senior year. It's Peyton Bowen senior year. It's Ivan Taylor sophomore year. Would they have a shot, if with Keon at Viper and Peyton Bowen at safety, would they have a shot to have the number one defense in the country? Yeah, they'd have the shot. Certainly have a shot. So I'd buy that. And then you've got all the other guys you've landed. So yeah, I'll buy that. And if those guys are good enough to leave early, then they set a great foundation and you're going to be in a good place. So I'll buy that. Yeah, I'll buy that. I like that. I like that T-Knack. My instinct was like, no. But yeah, I like that. I'll buy that. Because also, like, okay, my thought is like, well, keep Peyton Bowen. I don't know if he has like the maturity level to necessarily thrive at Notre Dame. But to your point, if he would have stayed at Notre Dame, that would have shown me more of a maturity level, right? So I've said this about Aaron Lynch. Well, Aaron Lynch ended up never maximizing his potential. So if he'd have stayed at Notre Dame, he wouldn't have done that. I'm like, quite the opposite. If he would have stayed at Notre Dame, it would have been because he grew up a little bit and made more mature decisions, and that would have made him a better player. So I like that, T-Knack. I like that. I'll buy that. Iden Benami, got several of them here. Number 1, Ivan Taylor didn't want to compete, so he went to Michigan. Maybe he was being a diva as well since Jadon got all the love the past months. Look, I'm selling that. Like I've explained this the other day. We don't need to dive into that again. There's a difference between making a smart business decision based on the depth chart and being afraid of competing. Guys who are afraid to compete don't go to places like Notre Dame. They don't go to places like Alabama. They don't go to places like Michigan. And you all know I can't stand Michigan as a program. But I can sit here and say objectively, as much as I dislike the program, kids that choose to play for them are not afraid of competition. There's also a top 100 safety in his class. Again, there's a difference between saying, I don't want to compete, and looking at the depth chart and saying, Notre Dame has signed 8 other safeties the last 3 years. Michigan has signed 4. I'll compete my butt off against those 4, but I don't want to have to compete against 8 because that's not putting myself in the best position. And there's some corners that Notre Dame has signed, right, that could play safety and nickel. Dallas Golden, Carson Hobbs, Cree Thomas, all guys could either play safety or nickel. And so that I'll compete, but I also want to make sure that if there's 8 or 9 guys compared to 4 or 5 guys, I'm going to get a lot more opportunities to show myself at the place with the lower depth chart, the lesser depth chart. So, no, I don't agree with that. I don't. Again, we need to be able to look at this and say, I don't like his decision. I wish he would have stayed at Notre Dame's class. And maybe there's something to the other part. I'm not going to get into that. But when it comes to competing, you don't go to a place like Michigan if you don't want to compete. It's as simple as that. You just don't. The only way that you say a guy doesn't want to compete is if he's asking to be given something. As far as I know, Ivan Taylor never asked Michigan for anything. He's not hesitant. I want you to promise me that I'll start. No, that's a kid that doesn't want to compete. He didn't. And so, and here's the thing too, guys. Let's be honest with ourselves, Notre Dame fans. If the roles were reversed and he flipped from Michigan to Notre Dame, very few of you would be saying he was afraid to compete. If Michigan had signed a bunch of safeties and they won the national championship last year and their safety class is rolling and they already had Kanoa Winston and they went out and got Jadon Blair and Ivan Taylor committed to Michigan and Jadon Blair went to was at Michigan and committed to Michigan and Ivan was like, you know what? There's a clear path for me at Notre Dame. I'm going to have to compete against some good players. They got Bronte Johnson. They got Kennedy Urlacher. They got Adon Schuler. But I'm going to get more opportunities to compete at Notre Dame than I would at Michigan. We'd all be like, hey, smart kid, man. He made the right decision, and we're glad to have him, and he's going to be a great player for us. That's what you'd all be saying. That's what you'd all be saying. He did not ask for guaranteed playing time. He wants an opportunity. And he's looking at it saying, hey, I got a better opportunity to show what I can do at Michigan than I will at Notre Dame. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And I don't have to like the decision, and I definitely don't have to like the school he picked to say, I get it. I don't like it, but I get it. And I think sometimes we're going to be a tad petty. We're being a tad petty when it comes to how we handle kids that don't pick Notre Dame. And I think we need to be a little bit better than that. Number 2, Brian is okay with blocking all Michigan fans in live chat. I'm selling that as well. I'm selling a lot of your stuff today, man. You're my dude, but I'm selling some of your stuff. I'm not blocking all Michigan fans. We've had Antoine Johnson in our chat hundreds of times, and I've never blocked him. Antoine's a great member of the chat. Sometimes him and the Ohio State guys get going at each other a little bit, and I got to tell everybody to chill out. But as far as how he engages Notre Dame and Notre Dame fans and us in this chat, I think he's great. And I'd welcome any Notre Dame fan that wants to come in here, or Michigan fan that wants to come here and be respectful and talk ball. Insured by Big is a LSU fan. He literally signed up for the message board tonight. Why? He's an LSU fan, but he's got respect towards us as a community. He's got respect towards Notre Dame. He likes talking ball, and he does so respectfully. You're welcome. So no, I'm not gonna block all Michigan fans, but I'll say this to you, I think this will make you feel better. My trigger for Ohio State and Michigan fans is much quicker because the majority of them are not very pleasant people. But we have some that are. Archer's great. Love Archer being a part of our community. And insured by Big. Very good member of our community. Antoine, back in the day when LaMarcus, what was his name? Ladarius Martin, right? Was in our chat. He hasn't been in here for a while, but he's an Alabama fan. Never blocked him sometimes, but hey, man, this isn't an Alabama chat. Chill out. We're talking about Notre Dame football. That's cool. But, so no, there's some Michigan fans out there that don't suck. Not many, but there's some. Aiden Benami with another. By so hold, Notre Dame special teams will be much improved and indirectly will win us, Notre Dame, 1 to 2 games. I'll buy that. Because, that could be a punt that helps you dominate field position. It could be Mitch Jeter nails a couple important field goals. It could be a blocked punt sets up a big win. So I would say, for example, Notre Dame beat Clemson by 21 points in 2022, 35-14, but it's the block punt that really sparked that game. And I would say that indirectly led to Notre Dame winning a game. I would say that absolutely. So I would say, yes, I'll buy that. Next one, by so hold, Notre Dame will win 13 plus games. I believe this. So I have Notre Dame going 11-1 plus 1. So I have them being 11-1. At least plus 1. I actually think Notre Dame's going to be a semifinal team this year. And that's kind of, my pie in the sky, everything goes perfectly kind of situation, but that's where I'm at, right? That's what the offseason is. But I think if Notre Dame's 11-1, they're going to get a 5 or a 6 seed, which is going to give them a very favorable second round quarterfinal matchup, which then gets them the semi. So yeah, I'll buy that. Next one from Madden Banami. By so hold, Zechariah Branch will break out and be a top 5 wide receiver. I think he's unreal. Well, I don't know about top 5. I mean, that's a very big jump, but it wouldn't shock me. I mean, we did our all opponent team yesterday, Iden, and I don't know if you were in the chat for that or if you watched that, but I projected him to be he was on my first team all opponent team. I think Zechariah is going to definitely make a big jump this year. Is he going to jump and be a top 5 overall receiver? Maybe next year in 2025. I don't know about this year, but it wouldn't shock me. I mean, he's an incredibly talented player. Now, if you were to say he's going to be one of the 5 most explosive players in college football, that I would say I could agree with. Because then you can include like punt returns, kick returns, and all that. Sure. Like Rocket Ismail, if you go back to 88, 89, 90, he was never one of the top 5 wide receivers in college football. His numbers weren't that. But if you say he's one of the 5 best, yeah, one of the 5 most dynamic, most explosive, most impactful, sure. Because he can impact the game as a receiver. They'd put him in the backfield. He was a punt returner. He was a kick returner. I mean, he could impact the game in so many different ways, even though he was never a quote-unquote top 5 receiver. And I think Zechariah Branch has very much a similar ability to impact the game. He's not as explosive as Rocket. I don't know that I've ever seen anybody as explosive as Rocket. But when you look at Rocket's career, he only had 4 receiving touchdowns in his career. He had 5 rushing touchdowns, 4 receiving touchdowns. He had 5 kick returns for touchdowns, and he had a punt return for a touchdown. So he impacted the game in a lot of different ways, and that's what made him so good. And I think Zechariah could have a similar impact for USC. Magis 16. By so hold, there are questions to be answered at every position on both sides of the ball. However, to become the team we hope to be, the major questions revolve around the offensive and defensive lines. I'm going to sell that. And the reason I'm going to sell that is I'm buying it for the offensive side of the ball, but I don't buy it for the defensive side of the ball. I don't think Notre Dame really has a lot of questions on defensive line. I just think it's like, okay, don't regress. That's not a question. Like, guys, Notre Dame's defensive line was really good last year. It was a minimum top 10 defensive line last year. And arguably your 2 best players are back. You have 3 starters back. Your entire depth chart at both defensive tackle spots and Viper are back. You've got some young players emerging, and you got a transfer in at the big end position who was better coming in than the guy that played at that position last year was coming in. You replaced Javonte Jean-Baptiste with RJ Oben, and you're replacing Nana Osafo-Mensah with Josh Burnham and Bryce Young. I think the expectations their defensive line is going to be better. So, no, I don't think there's really any questions about the D-line unless your question is, are they going to regress? Well, I mean, that's not really a question. You know, it's not like, well, because otherwise you could say that's a question about every single player in the country at every position. And I just don't know how productive that's going to be. But I fully expect the defensive line to still be excellent. The questions are about the offensive line. I don't think there's questions about the defensive line. The offensive line, lots of questions. Lots of talent, but lots of questions. So, you know, you could say if you want the team, if we to become the team that that we think Notre Dame can be, they have to be dynamic on both lines. I said, okay, yeah, I agree with that. I'd buy that. But to say that those are the 2 biggest question marks, I don't agree with that. Offensively, I'm with you. Defensively, I'm not with you on that one. But I think the way you framed it made it a better answer, or at least a better discussion, because it's not as simple to express. And somebody in the chat says Viper is not a question. Coleman, the Viper depth chart is literally the same exact guys they had last year, and they had a top 10 D line last year. Like, their defensive line was good enough to win a championship last year if the offensive was good enough. And it's the same dudes coming back. So, and they sucked. But they sucked last year at Viper, and they were still great on the defensive line. So, no, it's not a question. The only thing is like, okay, if they get better, it only makes their name that much better. But they showed they can have an elite top 10 D line last year with very little production from the Viper. So, no, it's not a question mark. It's something where I'm like, boy, I hope they're going to get better. It's an expectation of getting better, but it's not a question mark because they've proven that they can be there. Like, there should not be a discussion or a question about, gee, is the D-line going to be really good this year? That should be a given. The only way that they're not is if they regress. And I don't see them regressing. right? So again, it's not a question mark. They could be just as bad as they were last year, and the D line is still going to be really, really, really good. How do I know that? Because they were not very good last year, and the D line was still really, really, really good. So no, it's not a question mark. They could suck like they did last year, and the D line is still going to be very good because of the nature of that position and the nature he's playing. So again, you can focus on Viper, but if you're going to do that, you have to at least acknowledge the fact that the point that I just made. They were a top 10 D line last year. They were one of the best D lines of college football last year, and the Viper position was not very good. Are you anticipating the Viper position being worse with the same exact dudes in that position this year? Right. Well, if you're going to say that, then you could say, I have questions about Ohio State's running backs because I don't know if they're going to regress. I have questions about Ohio State's secondary because I think Denzel Burke and Caleb Downs may regress. I have questions about, this group over here because they may regress. Well, that's true for everyone. Right. So what I'm saying is if everybody that comes back plays the exact same way they did last year, Notre Dame's defensive line, at the very least, is as good as it was last year. Right? That's not a question mark. They may be better. That's the expectation, to be even better. But it doesn't make them a question mark. A question mark is, I don't know if Charles Jagusah is going to be good enough in year 2 to handle left tackle. I don't know if Notre Dame is good enough at guard to be good on the O-line. Why is it a question? Because they weren't good at guard last year, and it hurt them, which is why their offensive line wasn't as good, right? So that's the difference. And so, and again, you said, I question the consistency of Patel and the lack of pass, but he wasn't consistent last year. Junior Tuihalamaka had 0 sacks and 0 tackles for loss last year, and now they're both back. You add Boubacar, and you were still part of a great D-line last year. I don't think you're getting this. I think you're stubbornly focusing on something that doesn't actually answer the question. Was the D-line really flipping good last year? Yes. Did the Viper position struggle last year? Yes. So in 2022, the Viper position was very productive and the D-line was worse. Correct? It's about the unit as a whole. Notre Dame proved last year that they can have a big-time D-line and a big-time defense with very little production from the Viper. And it's the same dudes as last year. So at the very least, they're going to be the same dudes they were last year or better. So no, it's not a question mark. It's a strength. The defensive line is a strength. Simple as that. And yes, it can be better. No one's saying it can't be. But it's not a question. They are already really good. If they play exactly the same way they did last year, they're one of the best D-lines in college football. Could they be better? Sure. That's true for everyone. Name me one position group in college football that can't be better than it was a year ago. Name me one. Because if you're starting to get into these type of answers and responses, then essentially what you're saying is you're giving these big, broad things that are true for everyone. Xavier Watts can be better than last year. So is he a question mark? Benjamin Morrison can be better than he was last year. Is he a question mark? If Joe Alt would have come back, you could say, well, there's areas where he's got to get better. Does that make him a question mark? No, it doesn't. A question mark is that guy cost them games, or that guy isn't good enough to do this and they struggled last year, right? Pat Coogan's a question mark. Okay, why? Because his play hurt the D-line or hurt the O-line and made them not very good. The Vipers last year just kind of did their jobs. Didn't do it very well. They just kind of did their jobs. So the only way that it hurts the D-line in a way it didn't last year is if they regress. But that's true for everybody. Tommy Guns by So Hold. Notre Dame should develop better, lightweight sound reflectors to put at the top of the stadium that reflects the noise back down on the field. I don't agree with that. Now, I understand what you're trying to do and trying to make the stadium louder. I just don't think the stadium needs to be artificially made louder. Like, the other thing, too, is if you're doing that, it's harder to control the volume when you're on offense because any kind of loud noise is going to then get louder. Here's the best way to create a louder stadium. Put a better product on the field and create more marquee type of home games. That's the best way. If Notre Dame's got a dominant football team that fans just can't wait to watch play, then the stadium would be louder. Just will. And it's much cheaper that way too than it is to do all that kind of stuff. So I've just never been a big fan of artificial noise at a football game. Just not. Like, I don't like the fact that they put now speakers next to the band to magnify that. I don't like that either. John A1 with a couple buy-sell holds. Number one, Adon Schuler. Buy-sell hold. Adon Schuler have at least 4 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions, and 2 forced fumbles this upcoming season. Let's see, 4 tackles for loss. I'll buy that. 2 interceptions. I'll buy that. 2 forced fumbles. That's the one I can't go with you on, John, because I know he's a big hitter, but forcing fumbles is as much about being in the right place at the right time as it is about like being a big hitter. And last year they had Cam Hart forced 3 fumbles, Howard Cross forced 2. Nobody else forced more than 2. The year before that, nobody forced more than 1. The year before that, only 1 guy forced more than 2. Or 2. Jack Kaiser had 2. Isaiah Foskey had 6. Year before that, Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah forced 3. And the team as a whole only had 9. Year before that, 2019, Jameer Jones forced 2. Khalid Kareem forced 3. Adi forced 3. Julian Wara forced 3. Koramoah forced 2. Not a lot of safeties in this group. So I'm going to sell that part. I will buy the first 2, and I'm going to sell the last one. Buy sell hold. Jalen C will have more sacks this year than a starting Viper. Man, I got to tell you, man, I have to think about that one for a second here as I delete and ban this stupid Michigan fan. So, peace out, loser. So, Jalen Sneed will have more sacks than Viper. I'll tell you what. So, my first thought on this, John, is, boy, that would be bad. Like, I immediately went negative. Like, if he does that, that's a problem because then the Vipers aren't this and the Vipers aren't that and that kind of thing. And but then the other flip side of it is, but as much sub packages as Notre Dame does, third down, against teams that maybe run more spread or go with more tempo, then that could be good, right? He can get a lot of opportunities, and I think it's possible because here's the thing, and like Matt Boer and I were talking about this the other day in the chat, and he's making a comment about it now. I don't think he's an overly instinctive player. Matt doesn't either, but the reality is, to be a effective pass rusher, you don't need to be super, super instinctive like you do playing off-ball linebacker. I think Jalen has actually shown a knack in practices and in some of the games where he actually has shown a knack for winning in a pass rush situation. He actually has shown that. He hasn't shown instincts when it comes to like run game reads and fits or coverage feel. But as far as just attacking the ball, he's actually shown a pretty good feel for that. And so if he was able to, and this is what we talked about yesterday when we were talking about Jaden Ausberry, if the less Notre Dame can ask Jalen Sneed to do, the more effective I think he'll be. And if that means like, look, when you're on the field, you are attacking the football. I mean, that's where I think he is at his best. Could I see him being a 6-7 sack guy and having more in Botelho's at like 5 or 6? Sure, I could see that. And it's a good situation. It's a great place to be in because the difference in this scenario, if you think about like a lot of Isaiah Foskey's sacks, not a lot, but a good chunk of Isaiah Foskey's sacks came on third down. And in this type of defense, what they're doing now, then to me, you would have Jordan Botelho wouldn't be rushing off the edge the way that on third down in situations the way that Foskey was. You'd see Jalen Sneed doing that, which means he would get some of those sacks. So I could see that. I'm going to sell it just because for this reason, John. I'm going to sell it because Jalen Sneed has a lot to prove to me. And yes, Jordan Patelho has to get better too. There's no doubt about that. But Jordan Patelho still had 4 sacks last year. You know, he still had 4.5 sacks the year before. For all the complaining about Jordan Patelho and deserved complaining, he's got over 10 sacks the last 3 years. I mean, he had 4 last year, 4.5 the year before that. I mean, so Jalen Snead's got like what, 1 or 2 for his career? He'd have to show me a lot more improvement just to be as productive as what Jordan Patelho was last year in a disappointing season. So I'm going to sell that one, but it's possible. It's certainly possible, John. John A1 says, this is an interesting one, John. In 2023, Notre Dame's average margin of victory was 23.3 points. Buy, sell, hold that in 2024, Notre Dame's average margin of victory will be less, but they will have more wins. I am going to sell that because I believe, John, that in your statistics, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm going to kind of try to do this on the fly, but the impression I got from your statistics is that you only counted the 10 wins in that category. Or I mean, you did not. Let me just do some math here real quick, John, real fast, because this will actually answer my question. So no, you did not include just victories. You just added the difference in scoring, correct? So 23.3 is the difference between 39.2 points per game and 15.9 points per game. And I'm going to sell that because I think that they'll have a greater margin of victory because I believe there's going to be the offense is going to be better. I think the offense is going to be more dynamic. I think Notre Dame is going to jump out to more big early leads, which is going to allow the defense to be even more effective putting teams away. I think if Notre Dame loses some games or a game, then you're going to see if Notre Dame only loses 1 or 2 games, unless they're blowout games, I think that's going to improve the margin of victory as well. Like if Notre Dame loses 2 games this year, I think they're going to both be by less than 10 points, right? And so if they're both less by 2 points and Notre Dame wins more games, I think just by the very nature of the manner in which you are looking at this, then I think it's going to be less. Now, if you were to say the other way that I was contemplating of this, where if you're going to say, okay, in the wins only, that the points per the difference in margin for the wins only could be less, but they're going to have more wins, then I could agree with that. Because I could say, okay, maybe they're going to win more games, but maybe we could say the schedule at the top, there's going to be maybe more competitive games at the top. Whereas last year, the competitive games they lost. If they win those competitive games this year, then yeah, there's the points per game and the wins goes down. The point margin in the wins goes down. But since you're looking at all games, including games that had less points, then I think it's going to be greater because I think they're going to win more games. So a -8 versus Clemson turns into a +3 against Florida State. A -18 against Louisville, let's just say Notre Dame wins by a touchdown, turns into a +7 for Notre Dame. That's a big swing if they're going to win more games. And even if the other wins are by slightly less points, on the whole, it's still going to be more. So I think the answer is going to be determined by how you phrase it. And the way you phrased it, I'm going to sell. If you were to change it the other way to where in the wins only, the average margin is lower than what the wins were last year, then I would have bought that, if that makes sense. That's one of the things I love about you, John, is you really always you think deep, man. I absolutely love that stuff. Irish Niner. Buy, sell, hold. The backup quarterback will start at least 1 game for the Irish this season. I'm going to sell that just because I don't want to think negatively about somebody getting hurt. So I'm going to sell that. I think that I'm just projecting Riley Leonard to be healthy. If he gets hurt, then we can deal at the time, but I'm going to go ahead and go with the win. Walk on, carry off 78. Buy, sell, hold. At least 3 teams with 3 losses will make it into the college football playoff, including 1 conference champion. Okay, I can buy the conference champion one because I could see a scenario in which the Big 12 champion has 3 losses. I could see that. I'm selling it overall because I don't think you're going to have 2 at-large teams that are going to have 3 losses. I mean, it's going to be close. it's going to be close. Because here's the thing: some 3-loss SEC team that's 4th or 5th in that league is going to get bumped in, or some 3-loss Big Ten team or something like that's going to get bumped in. I just don't know that it's going to be 2 of them this year. So that would be my pushback a little bit on that. Let's look at some rankings over the last few years, and we can kind of look at this. So let's look at like the final college football playoff rankings from last year. So last season, if you would go down to it, the highest ranked 3-loss team would have been LSU at 13. They don't get in. If you go down to 2022 and look at the last week of the college football playoff rankings, the highest seeded 3-loss team would have been Utah at 8. And then K-State also had 3, and they were 9, but right now they'd be in the same league. So 2 of them would get in. The next highest ranked 3-loss team would have been Florida State at 13. They don't get in. So there would not have been 3 that year. Let's look at 2021. The highest ranked 3-loss team would have been Utah at number 11. The next highest ranked 3-loss team would have been Oregon at 14. You would have only had one, maybe one that year. 2020, that's a different story. We don't need to waste our time with 2020. Let's see. 2020 final college football playoff ranking from 2020. The highest ranked 3-loss team was Wisconsin at 8. The next highest was Auburn at 12. When you look at it, there's at Auburn at 12, you say, well, maybe they get in, but there's no group of 5 ahead of them. The highest ranked group of 5 would have been Memphis at 17. So Memphis then jumps up to the 12 spot, which bumps Auburn out. So you only would have had one 3-loss team in 2019. You look at 2018, they don't have 2018 on that one. So let's see here. Here we go. 2018, you'd have had Florida at 9, LSU at 10, Washington at 11, and Penn State at 12. UCF would have been in as a group of 5, but they wouldn't be now. You'd have to go all the way down to Boise at 22. So that would have bumped out Penn State. So you might have still had 3 in there that year. So 2018 would be the only year where maybe that happened. So I'm going to sell that because it just doesn't happen very often. So that's that's a good one. That's a good one. Like, that made me think a little bit, because my first reaction was to sell it, like easily sell it. But then I was like, hold on a second. There could be some scenarios where I could see this happening. And so, yeah, I that's a good thought, but I'm just going to sell it. Now, the counter argument to that walk-on is one of the things I've talked about is I think the way schedules are set up this year with the bigger leagues, I think it's going to be a more competitive year. I've predicted that I don't think anyone's going to be undefeated. So in that scenario, there's going to be a lot more 2-loss teams, which could then lead to more 3-loss teams. So my initial sell was strong. My current sell is not as strong. And I could see it happening, but for now, I'm going to sell that because there's just too many teams that would have to show me something to be able to knock off some of those teams and get to that many 3-loss teams. Scott G, buy, sell, or hold. We will lose one quarterback to the portal before kickoff at Texas A&M. I don't think that'll happen. It doesn't benefit a kid right now to jump in the portal before the season starts. It really doesn't. I mean, he's going to have a hard time finding a team right away, and he can't be part of that team. Just that this year, just play the season out, talk with the coaches, and like let's just say it's Steve Angeli, just hypothetically speaking. There's a chance Steve, if he stays through the year, could walk away with his degree and then go transfer somewhere and have 3 years left to play, 2 years left to play. No, yeah, he'd have 2 to 3 years left to play. But if he transfers before the season, he doesn't get to save that year. It's still a year of eligibility. So, like, even if he walked away from the team because he was going to transfer, and they said, "Hey, you can't do that. You can't be part of the team if you're, not going to play," he'd still stay in school and get closer to his degree, in my opinion. So that's sell that. Second one from Scott G. Notre Dame will finish with the number 1 pass defense in the nation this year. Well, let's look at, there's 2 ways to calculate that. Number 1 is just total yards. Last year they finished 3rd, and 2 Big Ten teams finished 1st and 2nd. Another Big Ten team finished 7th. Another Big Team finished 5th. And another Big Ten team finished 10th because the Big Ten had crap offenses. The addition of USC, Washington, Oregon, and UCLA, not so much UCLA, but the addition of those other 3 teams should up the game for the Big Ten's offenses. And I think there's some other Big Ten teams that I think are going to be better on offense this year than they've been in the past. Better coach, better players, things like that. So I don't think you're seeing quite the same dominance. And I have also said I don't think Notre Dame's schedule is littered with a lot of great passing teams and a lot of great quarterbacks. So I could see Notre Dame making that jump. And last year, Notre Dame was at 157.3. Ohio State was number 1 at 145.9. That's only a, 11.4 difference, yard per game difference. I could see that. I could see that. The other one is passer rating, and Notre Dame was already number 1. So they were number 1 last year. So I could see that. I could see that. Ball Peen Shillelagh. Buys a hold. If Notre Dame had to play with the second team offense but first team defense the whole year, they would still win 8 games. That's an interesting proposition. So let's think about this. If Notre Dame spent the whole year with their second team offense and their first team defense, so your quarterback is Steve Angeli, you got Jadarian Price at running back or Jeremiah Love, your tight end is Eli Raridan, your receivers are KK Smith, Jordan Faison, and say Bo Collins or Jaden Thomas. Your offensive line is Sullivan Absher. Let's just say Rocco Spindler, Sam Pendleton, Christopher Tarrick, and either Emil Wagner or Tosh Baker. That's still pretty decent offense right there, to be honest with you. So I think that team goes out this year and beats Northern Illinois, beats Purdue, beats Miami of Ohio, beats Stanford, beats Navy, beats Army, beats Virginia. So they only got to win 1 game of at A&M, home against Louisville, at Georgia Tech, home against Florida State, at USC. Only got to win 1 of those games to be an 8-win team, and I think they would do it. So I'll buy that one. I think you got a couple more coming up here about this, right? So if they had to play with the second team defense but the first team offense the whole year, they would still win 8+ games. So that would mean your D-line is Boubacar Traore, Josh Burnham on the end, Gabriel Rubio, Jason Onye at D-tackle, Kingston Viliama Asa, Jalen Sneed, and Jaden Alsbury at linebacker. Let's say Christian Gray as of now and Leonard Moore at corner and a Don Schuler and Luke Tauch at safety with the first team offense. They'd beat Northern Illinois, they'd beat Purdue, they'd beat Miami of Ohio, they beat Stanford. It's the same scenario. I think they'd win 7 games for sure, and then they have to win 1 of those other games to be in there. So, yeah, I'll go there again. And then the last one, if they had to play both second-team offense and defense the whole year, they would still be bowl eligible. So if they started those 2 teams, they'd still beat Northern Illinois. I still think they'd beat Purdue, still beat Miami of Ohio, you still beat Stanford, you still beat Navy, still beat Virginia, still beat Army. Yes, they'd be bowl eligible. Yeah, they'd be bowl eligible. 100%. And that's saying a lot. But again, you have the second team and the whole depth chart. So yeah, I think they'd still be bowl eligible. That's an interesting one. Very interesting one. Feller 97. Due to the play of our defense, it is more likely that Riley Leonard will finish the season with 40 touchdowns for over 3,500 yards. Due to the play of our defense, it is more likely that Riley Leonard will finish the season with 40+ touchdowns over 3,500 yards. So he's saying it's more likely, if I'm correct on this, Feller, and if you're in the chat, correct me if this is not accurate. But you're saying because of the way the defense plays, dominance, giving them field position, all that, it's more likely that Riley Leonard scores 40 touchdowns than it is that he has for over 3,500 yards. So I assume you're calculating shorter fields, things like that. So, yeah, I would say that. Because, again, how I'm assuming you're asking the question kind of answers the question for me in that, yeah, he'd have more touchdowns than yards. Look, I went through that in a season where I coached an All-American running back. I think he ended up rushing for like 1,100 or 1,200 yards. but he scored like 20 touchdowns because our average starting field position was the 48-yard line. We scored 40 points as a team. This is when I was at Muhlenberg. We scored up until we lost in the second round of the national playoffs. Going into that game, we were over 40 points a game, and we were only averaging about 350 yards per game because our field position, like I said, was basically midfield. So we'd get 52-yard drives to get touchdowns, and that's just not going to pound. That's not going to rack the stats up like you'd hope. Next one from Feller 97. And I'll say this, Feller, I like the thought on that one. Like, that's one of those ones that he had to put some thought into that, and it had to put some thought into the answer. So I like that one. Feller 97 also says, so hold Florida State and Clemson leaving the ACC, and Notre Dame leaves to move Olympic sports back to the Big East. I could see that, Feller, because I was about to call you Bob, because Bob Feller, Hall of Fame pitcher. Sorry about that. Florida State and Clemson leaving, I think, begins a domino effect of other schools leaving, which basically really crushes the ACC. And I could see a scenario where if the ACC goes away, that Notre Dame would move back to the Big East. So I buy that. I'll buy that. Salty Virginia Peanuts, my man. Notre Dame will receive no more than one commitment from currently prioritized receivers, Misters Derek Meadows, Tanook Hines, and Dylan Robinson. But the offense's passing yards and TDs this season will be the best in the last decade. So that would be 24, 23, 22, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15. So going back to 2015, Notre Dame has passed for 3,205 yards, 2,692 yards, 3,672 yards. That was with Jack Cohn's year. 2,849 yards, 3,278 yards, 3,347 yards, 2,326 yards, 3,051 yards, and then 3,360 yards. I would really want to buy that. The only season that could maybe make me think twice about it is 21 when they threw for over 3,600 yards. I'm going to buy that, though, because I think Notre Dame goes for over 3,700 at least this season in the 12+1 scenario that I always talk about. So, I mean, and 3,700 yards is not a lot of yards in 13 games. It's an average of 284.6 yards per game. I think they can get there. So I'm gonna buy that, because like when they did it in 2021, they threw 451 passes. That's 100 more than they passed this year. They averaged 8.1 yards per attempt, and this year they averaged 9.1 yards per attempt. So if you look at Notre Dame's 9.1 yards per attempt, let's say they keep that next year, and they only average 50, they only throw 50 more passes than they did last year. That's 3,649 yards. You're not even getting all the way in attempts to what they did the other year. So you're very close to passing them just in that regard. If you average a slightly more yards per attempt at the same, number of about, let's say 401, then you're at 3,689 yards and you're past what they were last in 2021. So I think it's not that they're going to throw the ball 451 times like they did in 2021. It's going to be more about you're going to be more efficient and explosive than they were in 2021. And you're not going to throw it as much because you're going to be much better running the football. So yards wise, I'm going to say, yes, they go over. Touchdown wise, I'm much more prone to take that one. They threw 31 last year, 25 the year before that, 30 in 21, 15 in 2020, 37 in 2019, 23 in 2018, 20 in 2017, 27 in 2016, and 25 in 2015. So the 2019 season, where they threw 37 touchdowns, could be tough to pass up. So I'm going to sell touchdowns, because I think what's going to happen is Riley and the backup quarterbacks, I do believe, get over 30, but I don't know that they get to 38, which is basically an average of almost 3 a game, because of the fact that Riley Leonard is going to have more rushing touchdowns in some of those red zone situations. Now, 37 touchdown passes that year from the quarterbacks, 34 from Ian Book, 2 from Phil Dracovic, 1 from Brendan Clark. And then that season, Ian Book had 4 rushing touchdowns. Phil Dracovic had none. Brendan Clark had none. So you ended up with 41 total touchdowns. So I'll say this. If we're just talking about passing touchdowns, I'm going to say sell. If you can give me total touchdowns for the quarterback position, rushing and passing, then I'll buy. So they'd have to get more than 41 total, because I could see them getting 32 passing touchdowns and 10 rushing touchdowns from the quarterback position and having more. So I'll buy it that way. But if it's just passing, then I'm going to sell it. Next one from Salty Virginia Peanuts. The great one, Jaden Greathouse, will lead the team in receptions and lead or tie in touchdowns. I'm buying that. I mean, I think we've talked about that one before. The slot's going to get a lot of touches, and I think they're going to move him around a little bit. He's going to be more of a volume guy, because I could see Chris Mitchell having more yards, but Jaden Sneed has more. Jaden Greathouse has more catches. And Jaden showed last year he's a touchdown guy. I mean, what do you have, like 2 in the first game? And I think he ended up with 5. I mean, he led the team and here's the thing. For him to lead the team in touchdown receptions, he's just got to do what he did last year. I mean, he did that last year. So he's already shown he can do that. And I think he'll get even more this year. So, yeah, I think Jaden Greathouse is going to lead the team. And I'm more likely that he leads the team in touchdowns than he does receptions, in my opinion, because that's what he was a touchdown machine in high school, and he showed himself to be. I mean, he finished, let's see, 1, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. He was 6th on the team last year in receptions. He was 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th in the team in yards, but he led the team in receiving touchdowns last season. So yeah, he's a guy that knows how to get into the end zone, and so I will buy that one. I will buy that one for sure. Salty Virginia Peanuts also has this one. This is a little bit of a longer one here. Actually, this was not Salty. I don't think I changed the name correctly. So let me just pull this one up, and I want to attribute it to the right person here real quick. So let me pull up the buy, sell, hold questions. I believe this is on the last page. Give me a second, folks. I want to get to this one. This was from Eye on the Ball. So I apologize for not getting the right name on there. So this is from Eye on the Ball. It says, given the mean time to return to unrestricted play was 15 and a half. What's that? I don't know. Greater than, right? Plus minus 9.5 days for high ankle sprain, resprain. Riley misses. So buy, sell, hold. Riley misses 2 full games on re-injury of high ankle sprain. Riley misses total playing time of 3 games on re-injury of high ankle sprain. And Riley misses total playing time of 4 games or more on re-injury of high ankle sprain. Well, I've said before, I'm not predicting him to get injured again. He had that one injury last year. He's had the surgeries and all that to come back from it. I just don't see it. I can't predict that it's going to happen again. It could very well be something that bothers him all year. And I'll say this, if he re-injures it, then yeah, I think he'll at least miss a couple games. No doubt. And depending on when he misses it, you could see them maybe be a little overly cautious. So let's say, he gets hurt against Louisville. Okay, so they got a bye week, Stanford, Georgia Tech, Navy, and then another bye week before Florida State. So maybe they say, hey, let's just really get him back to health. I could see something like that, but I'm going to sell it just because I'm not going to predict that he's going to get hurt. But if he does, then I would probably buy the 2 full games and sell on the others. If it's just a re-injury of the high ankle sprain, that's why I would say that. Riker Ferg for Brian. Buy, sell, hold. The first play you will call of EA Sports College Football Playoff 25 will be an RPO and 11 personnel, 2x2 set that motion into 3x1 set. It would actually be the other way around. I'd start 3x1 and go to 2x2, and it won't be a RPO. It'll just be a straight drop back. I'm just telling you right now, it'll be a pure drop back. And I don't know what the offensive system is going to look like, but my favorite play back in the day was double outs from the outside receivers, a slot post, and then a Y-in was my favorite play. I'd smash people with that concept. So yeah, probably hopefully there's something like that still in the playbook, but without knowing what their playbook's going to look like. But I'm gonna sell that because I'll probably go 3-by-1, motion to 2-by-2, and then have just a pure drop back. Good one. That was fun, Riker. Oh, and by the way, I did. Vince and I actually went out last night and we bought our PlayStations, our new PlayStation. So we do have it, and then we reserved the game for the 19th. So we're set. I haven't hooked mine up yet. Haven't had time to hook mine up yet, but Vince was playing it all night last night. So if y'all want to know why, I'm throwing Vince under the bus right now. If y'all want to know why the podcast is a little late getting up today, it's because somebody, Vince, was up too late playing PlayStation with the new PlayStation he bought last night. So that's why I got up a little bit late today. He forgot. All right. Riker Ferg also says, by so hold, Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, and NC State will leave the ACC by the end of the decade, and the ACC will merge with the AAC. I'm going to buy the first part, sell the second part. I don't think they'll merge with the AAC. I think you'll see those teams kind of either kind of form something different, or you'll see a lot of those teams get eaten up by the other leagues as the ACC goes away. You'll see the Big 12 take a chunk of them. You'll see the Big 10 take some of them. You might see the SEC take a couple, and then the rest might go off. But the remainder of the other 11 or whatever teams are not going to go to the AAC. That's not how it'll work. You may see like Pitt go to the Big 12, something like that. You're not going to see them all go to the AAC. Reicherberg also asks, or by so hold, there will be a game this year that Notre Dame will need a goal line stand to win the game and stay undefeated. I could see something like that. I mean, it's happened before. I think a goal line stand is probably one of the least likely things to happen, like late field goal block, late field goal miss, late field goal make, punching it in from the end zone. But I mean, we saw this in 2012, right? The goal line stand against Stanford. So yeah, sure. Let's have some fun with it. Yeah, sure. I'll buy that. I like where your head's at, Riker. Thinking outside the box a little bit. We are Notre Dame. Texas A&M will move to the Big Ten from the SEC by 2026. Sell that. I don't think there's any way that they're going to go to the Big Ten. By so hold, SMU and Notre Dame football game will be a big-time national game when they finally play. I could see that. If Rhett Lashley's still there, I could see that. Absolutely. SMU will make it to the AAC championship game within the next 5 years, or a playoff appearance in the next 5 years. ACC title game, sure, especially if the ACC is able to survive the pending departures of Florida State and Clemson. It'll be like the Big 12. It'll be an easier path for them. If the AAC can poach some teams, so let's say Florida State leaves, let's say Clemson leaves. We'll go with Riker's earlier scenario. Florida State leaves, Clemson leaves, and Virginia or North Carolina and NC State follow. Okay. And then the ACC says, okay, that would leave them with what? 10 teams? What was the ACC was 14 teams last year, correct? So that would leave them with 10 teams, correct? So let's look at, well, what's the ACC at this year? So I believe they're 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So they're at 17 teams now. Let's say Florida State leaves, Clemson leaves, North Carolina leaves, NC State leaves. And then let's say Virginia leaves. That gets them down to 12. They're going to add, they could easily just add Oregon State and Washington State, and just do that. Gives their West Coast teams more teams to play. I think that would be the easy solution to get back up to 14. And then maybe they poach some AAC teams. But here's the thing. The ACC values itself on being an academic-oriented conference. Who in the AAC would make any sense academically to join the league? The only one that really would make any sense would be Rice. That's about the only one that I would consider any type of prominent academic institution in the AAC. So I think you just go out and poach those other two teams and maybe Navy, maybe. So I think that would kind of be the way that it would go. If the AAC were able to keep, because that's the thing is, could they stop the bleeding after 4 or 5 teams? That would be the question for the ACC. Like the Big 12 was able to kind of stop the bleeding after Texas and Oklahoma left. And they had a plan for going out and getting some teams to make them better. There's not as many options for the ACC to do that. And then also what's going to happen is, okay, if those teams leave, those 4 or 5 teams leave, then ESPN is going to void the contract. There was an interesting chat on the Twitter and somebody was like, why would ESPN? Somebody was like, look, ESPN's behind all this. And somebody's like, why would ESPN do that? They have the ACC. Why would they be okay with these teams leaving for the Fox Sports? And I'm like, because the ESPN doesn't want the ACC anymore. I think ESPN's coordinating all of this stuff because they don't want the ACC anymore. They don't want the money they're paying the ACC anymore. They don't. They want to take the teams they like, try to get some of them in the SEC. But the big thing for them is they want out of that contract with the ACC. In my opinion, that's what I think that they want to do. And so I think they're behind a lot of this stuff that's going on. I absolutely do. But it would just, if they're able to get Oregon State and Washington State and maybe Rice or some other team like that, and they can stay afloat, well, then SMU now becomes a team that could be able to contend with, and play in an ACC title game against a Miami or something like that. But I just have a bad feeling that if 4 or 5 leave, then a lot of others follow. Because here's the thing: here's the most coveted teams in the ACC: Florida State and Clemson for football purposes, sports purposes, but not so much for TV. Then you've got North Carolina and NC State, which are a package deal. You want North Carolina, you got to take NC State because they want that Carolina market, and then Virginia because they want the DMV market, Maryland, Delaware. Or Virginia, Maryland, and up that way. So Maryland, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware. So Miami's not really a market that's coveted, right? And so will those teams kind of come after Miami? I don't know. Is Georgia Tech coveted? I don't think so. Is Pittsburgh a market that they're trying to covet for college football? Not really, because it's not a big college football market. So I don't know how desired a lot of those teams are going to be, unless the Big 12 was just trying to buy the big league and just, looking at it from a survival thing. I don't know that makes a ton of sense. So we'll see if there's just this mass exodus the way that the Big 12, what happened to the Pac-12. I just don't know if that's. I think because of what happened to Pac-12, I don't know if those leagues will have room for all the ACC teams. So it's going to be interesting how it plays out, and I'm not looking forward to it. It's just going to be a mess. Nathan Milton at Notre Dame, the safety position. By so hold, at Notre Dame, the safety position has been the most frustrating from a recruiting perspective, and it's not even close. Right now, receiver position is more frustrating, but overall, I could probably buy that, Nathan, because some of the positions I would have otherwise said, like D-line recruiting, is been not as good as you want it to be, but it hasn't been terrible. They've put a lot of defensive linemen in the NFL. They've had a lot of really good. 2012, your team was driven by defensive line. Your entire starting 4 in 2015 was NFL players. 2018, you had like 7 or 8 NFL players in your rotation on the D line, and like drafted NFL players in your D line. Or no, it was 6 drafted, and then 7 or 8 that played in the NFL. Your 2020 team had a pretty darn good D line. Your 23 team had a pretty darn good D line. So yeah, I'd say I'd buy that. I'd buy that, Nathan. I think that's fair. Nathan Milton also says, by so whole, Chancey Stuckey negatively impacted the program more than Brian Van Gorder. That's a hard sell. Very hard sell. Chancey Stuckey negatively impacted one position. Brian Van Gorder impacted the entire defense. That's a hard sell. By so hold, in the next 3-4 years, Max Bulla becomes the next Notre Dame defensive coordinator. I'm selling that. Like, look, guy's done a great job, but let's pump the brakes on putting too much on him. He's been a full-time college football coach for a grand total of 0 seasons. This is his first one. Let's just enjoy what we're going to get out of him now, and not like pump him up to be the next coordinator. Like, remember there was a time when people were like pumping up, well, hey, maybe Chip Long will be the next head coach, or maybe Clark Lee will be the next head coach at Notre Dame just because they had like one good season. It's like, hey guys, they did a great job this year, but can we pump the brakes a little bit on anointing them as a second coming? Like, let's see Max Bulla, how he handles being a full-time coach for a whole season before we start pushing for that. Is it something that I could see happening down the road? Of course I could see it happening down the road, but it's way too early to be having that conversation. So I'm going to sell that for now. And I just want to see how Max Bulla does. So far, so good. I'm very high on Max Bulla as a coach, and I've heard a lot of good things about how his ability to teach and instruct, and that's all good. But let's just let the guy be a head coach for at least a year before we start talking about him being a coordinator. But I get where I get the excitement, Nathan. I do. By so hold from Nathan. Riley Leonard comes out of the gate guns blazing against Texas A&M, and the offense sets the tone for the rest of the season. I'll buy that. Yeah, I'll definitely buy that. I mean, that's what I'm hoping for. So, yeah, I'll buy that. I'll buy that for sure. And let's see. We got some more here. Give me a second. Okay. Just like randomly, it'll just decide, I don't want to switch screens anymore. So I don't know why it does that. Let me see here. Is that the last one? It is not the last one, but so I don't know why it is. Give me 1 second, everybody. When Vince is cutting this up, he's going to have to cut this part out. There's still several more. We're still rolling, everybody. We're not out of here yet. Right. Buy, sell, hold. Owen, ND15. Quinshon, buy or sell, hold. Quinshon Judkins is the most overhyped player coming into the college football season. Amen. Buy. 100% buy. I saw a thing. What is it? The College Football 2025 has him as like the number 8 offensive player in the country. I'm like, he's not even the best running back on Ohio State's roster. Like, what are you talking about? Yes, he rushed for a lot of yards last year. Because he carried the ball a lot of times. I mean, like, I'm going to give you guys some numbers here real quick because it's really kind of nuts. Like, it's like, oh, he came from the SEC. Who cares? He rushed for 1,158 yards last year. He averaged 4.3 yards per carry, 15 touchdowns. You know why? He had a lot of very short yardage touchdowns. Audric Estime last year. So Quinshon Judkins had 271 carries last year. Audric Estime had 210. Audric Estime had 61 fewer carries than Quinshon Judkins. And yet Audric ran for 1,341 yards, and Quinshon Judkins ran for 1,158. That's 183 fewer yards than Audric on 61 more carries. If Audric would have carried the ball as many times as Quinshon Judkins at the same yards per carry that he had this year, he would have finished the season with 1,731 yards. Think about that. And if he had the same amount of carries, his touchdowns, he would have had 23 touchdowns compared to 15 for Quinshon. So about 600 more yards if he would have had the same number of carries. That guy is a solid run. He's a good running back. He'll be a really good complementary piece to Travion Henderson. And the hope is that it allows some of the workload to come off of Travion so he can stay healthy the whole season. He's a good running back. People are acting like he's like the best running back in the country. He's not even close. Not even close. He's not even the best running back on his team. Just off the top of my head, I can name 5 running backs I would rather have over him. So, yeah, I'm buying that. He is incredibly overhyped. Doesn't mean he's not a good football player, just very overhyped. Owen ND15 also has a buy sell hold. Nebraska is on the come up with Rule and will win 8+ games this year and win 10 games next year. So, let me pull up my predictions schedule here because I have their schedule here. So give me 1 second to pull this up. So I have a list. I have a thing that I broke down that's helping me with my predictions because I'm going to have those up this week. I wanted to get them up earlier in the week, but with the job stuff and trying to get people, it's just been a little bit harder. So let's go to where's that format? I know I had that up here. So where's it at? Numbers. Okay. I can't find. Oh, here we go. Preseason predictions. Here we go. So Nebraska this year, I right now have Nebraska at 8 wins. I have them beating UTEP, Colorado, Northern Illinois, and Iowa at home, Rutgers at home, at Indiana, home against UCLA, and home against Wisconsin. I have them losing at Purdue and just like a weird upset win, at Ohio State, at USC, and at Iowa. So I'll buy that. 10 games next year. It's possible. Let's pull up Nebraska's schedule for next year. I don't know if I know the Big Ten has their schedule out in advance, so they should have all 12 games scheduled for next year, at least most of them. So let's see here. They have the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So, okay, so next year, their non-conferences, they play Cincinnati and Indianapolis, Akron at home, and then it looks like Houston Christian at home. Their home games in the conference are Iowa, so that's 3-0. They play Iowa at home, Michigan at home, Michigan State at home, Northwestern at home, and USC at home. Their conference road games are at Maryland, at Minnesota, at Penn State, and at UCLA. 10 games, not out of the question if they can build on this year and then have a good recruiting class, another good recruiting class, and then some success in the portal. Their schedule sets up very favorably. There's no Ohio State. There's no Oregon. You get Michigan at home and Iowa both at home. So, yeah, I could see. I'm going to buy that. I don't know if I'm not as optimistic about the 10 wins next year, but 8 and then at least potentially winning 10 next year, I'll buy that. I'll definitely buy that. That's a good thought, Owen. Ryan Michael has several here coming up. Buy, sell, hold, assuming all stay healthy. Tosh Baker ends up with less snaps in a 12+1 than Sullivan Absher, Gerby Lambert, and Emil Wagner. That assumes Tosh won't. I'll say this. If Tosh doesn't win the starting job out of fall camp, I'll buy that. Yeah, I'll buy that. Yeah. Ryan Michael, assuming both stay healthy, Junior Tuihalamaka ends up with more snaps than Boubacar Traore. I buy that. I think Boubacar will be more productive, but I think Junior will play more snaps. I hope that I'm wrong on that, but I think that'll be the case. Ryan also says, with excellent linebacker recruiting in recent years, Notre Dame ends up moving Jaden Osbury to safety. He then loses 5 or so pounds to gain a little more explosion, currently 216, to shore up the depth chart in 2025 after losing Watson Hurd. If he can play some nickelback, couldn't he figure out safety? I personally like this if he could transition. No, he can't. It's a completely different situation. Like, what he's going to be asked to do at nickel is not going to be what he's going to be asked to do at safety. Because you can look at the word nickel, but the reality is he's a rover. He's a rover that can do more than you normally get from a rover. That's different than putting him at safety. I also don't think it's smart, in my opinion, to move him further away from the football. I want Jaden closer to the football, not further away from the football. I also don't think Notre Dame is in a situation where they need to move him for the depth chart. Yes, they're going to lose those 2 guys, but you're going to have Adon Schuler coming back. You're going to have Luke Talich coming back, Ben Minnick coming back. They're all going to be juniors. Adon's going to play a ton this year. I think Luke's going to play a ton this year. Then you'll have Bronte Johnson will be a sophomore. Kennedy Urlacher will be a sophomore. Tabron Benny Powell will be a sophomore. That's 6 guys right there. And then you're adding Jadon Blair. You're adding Ethan Long. And you're potentially, hopefully, adding Brandon Logan. Jadon Blair is a play-right-away guy. So you're going to have Adon, who's got a bunch of playing time. Luke Talich will probably have a bunch of playing time. And then you'll have Jadon Blair coming in. Plus, Bronte will be going into year 2. Kennedy will be going into year 2. I just don't think there's a need for that. I would rather move Cree Thomas back to safety than Jaden Osbury. I don't. And if he's that good at nickel, like, here's the thing, Ryan. Let's just say hypothetically that he's athletic enough to thrive at safety like you're referring to, okay? And you know, I'm not even saying it's crazy out of the question. I'm just saying I don't want to do that. I don't think you need to do that. It limits. I mean, I think he's a better athlete than DJ Brown, right? So I don't think it's a crazy thing as far, you can't move safety. Are you nuts? Or are you going to move Greg Bowen to safety next? I'm not being a jerk about it. I understand where you're coming from, and I don't even think it's not a crazy idea. I just don't think you need to do that. I think you want him close to the ball, but the other part is I don't know why you'd want to do that with the numbers you have coming back. And who's going to play the nickel next year? If he's that good at, here's my point. If he moves that well, why would you not want him at nickel? Like, I just don't understand that. I don't know why you'd want to have him at nickel, move him away from that nickel spot if he's that good. If he's that athletic and that productive that he can go play safety, I don't know why you'd want to move him further away from the ball with all the talent. I'd say, look, get Jadon Blair coached up, right? Just get him coached up. Get Luke Talich ready to go. Get Bronte ready to go. You're going to have plenty of talent at safety. It's going to be young, but get him going. That's where I'm at. But I like where your head's at, Ryan. You're trying to think outside the box. I just don't know that that's the move I would make. And I'm not trying to take away from nickel, because then who's going to play that? Who's going to play in the slot? Jordan Clark's also going to be gone. Who else is going to be there? That would be my other concern. All right. Ryan has another couple super chats. Number one is Notre Dame's wide receivers play very well in 24, and Notre Dame flips a top 150 wide receiver before early signing day. I don't know that they'll do that. I think they'll flip a receiver potentially. I don't know that it'll be a top 150 guy. I think Notre Dame likes to go out and get those KK Smith underrated guys with a lot of athleticism. But you know what? I'm in a good mood tonight, Ryan. I'm gonna buy that. I'm gonna buy that. And if the first thing happens, then I think the second thing becomes much more likely. I could see that. And then the next one is Shedeur Sanders by Sahold. Shedeur Sanders is closer to a top 10 quarterback than a top 5 quarterback in college football. I completely agree with that. I'm not high on Shedeur Sanders. I think he's got some talent. I think his talent is overrated. And I've got major question marks about his decision making and major question marks about his leadership. There's a lot of quarterbacks I would take over Shedeur Sanders, including the kid that's at Notre Dame. Absolutely. Absolutely. Wade Garrett, buy, sell, hold. Notre Dame's 2025 recruiting class ends up being the class you thought it would be. It would when it first started. I'll buy that. I mean, look, there's going to be some misses along the way. There's going to be some positions that are not going to be strong. They're not going to be as good at receivers as I thought they're going to be, most likely. But they're going to be even better at linebacker than I thought they were going to have. They're not going to be quite as strong. Maybe you say, hey, look, I thought they were going to be pretty good at, maybe you thought they're going to get one more D lineman. They didn't, but they're going to still be really good at safety and corner. So, I mean, I think overall it's going to be about what I thought it was going to be. It's going to be a really, really good class. Is it as good as last year's class? Maybe, maybe not. Let's see how they play their senior years, but it's still a really good class. And you're now stacking up 3 classes in a row that are just really, really good. And that's where you want to be. I am Tenzin. Notre Dame becomes viewed as linebacker U in a couple years due to the depth chart and their performances and accolades. I'll buy that because you're also going to have a couple things going for you, not just on top of talent and performance in the depth chart, but you've already had 3 Butkus Award winners in the last 12 seasons, 12 to 13 seasons, right? Manti in 2012, Jalen Smith in 2015, and Jeremiah Wusu in Koromoa in 2020. Then if you say, let's say Drake Bowen goes out next year and wins it, and Notre Dame's getting Jack Kaiser gets drafted in the 3rd or 4th round, right? And then a couple of years, you get Drake goes in day 1 or day 2, and Kingston goes in day 1 or day 2, and you've got a Butkus Award winner. Yeah, I could start to see Notre Dame start earning that title because I don't know that there is an LBU right now that's modern. There's still a lot of LBUs that are holding on to the past, Penn State, Miami. I don't know if there's a team right now, maybe Bama, just from a volume standpoint, who would be LBU now, right? That it's just, boy, I don't know how they're going to surpass that. I certainly think that they could do that. And here's the thing. Since 2010, no team has had more Butkus Award winners than Notre Dame. The problem has been outside of those top dudes, it's you haven't been as good. You had the 3 studs, and then you had Drew Tranquil and Tavon, who were really good in a couple years. But then there's been a lot of just kind of mediocre play, and it's starting to get better now. But yeah, I think it's going to get really good, really, really good. Wade Garrett says Notre Dame Notre Dame goes 0-3 on the remaining current receiver targets. I mean, where things stand right now, I'll buy that. Now, there's a little asterisk there that Notre Dame is making a really hard push on one of the players that's going to be committing soon, and they're not giving up on another player that's committing soon. So one of them's a done deal. It's not going to happen. But the 2 others are still battling for. There's still a chance they can get one of them. And then your next one is Notre Dame gets one of the 3 current remaining receiver targets. I'm going to sell that for now, but it's at least trending to where the second one might be true. And if you want to know more about that, check out the message board at boards.archbreakdown.com. I have a big intel piece that breaks down all the receiver recruiting, and you can check all that out. I explain what's going on with the 3 receiver recruits, Derek Meadows, Tanook Hines, Dylan Robinson, why Notre Dame's trending in not a good direction with all 3, what their plans are with 2 of them to hopefully try to stem the tide and get back on it. So we'll see. Last one is Notre Dame flips a big high school name receiver target late in the cycle after on-field success. I'm going to sell that one. It's, big name, like top 50 guy, top 100 guy. I don't think that's going to be the case. But they'll flip somebody. They've done it each of the last couple of years. I mean, flipped KK Smith from Texas Tech 2 years ago. Flipped Logan Saldate from Oregon State last year. So I see that. And I believe that is the last question. So that's going to do it, everybody. That is the last question from you guys. Tons of great submissions today. So I really appreciate y'all. So we went 2 hours and 45 minutes. It's late. The dogs are over here sleeping, so we ended up getting through it. So I really appreciate y'all being with me tonight, and I really appreciate y'all's patience and understanding for sort of dealing with the dogs and then just having to put the show on late. We had a lot of issues today here in the old Granger community and some power outages and things like that. So we just couldn't go earlier in the day, and obviously Vince wasn't able to do it. And if you got in late and you didn't realize we're doing it, you can always go back to the beginning and watch again. We had a lot of fun talking about a lot of different things. We'll be back tomorrow, normal time, 1 p.m. on Thursday. Vince and I'll be back with a show. If for some reason Vince can't do it, I'll at least be back with a show. And saw some faces in here that I haven't seen in a while. My guys, John and Kate Keevers, were in here, which was great. We don't get to see them very much. Some other faces that we haven't seen as much. So I was glad you guys were able to be with us, and appreciate y'all being with me tonight. It was a lot of fun. Make sure you check out the message board, folks. Got a big intel piece on there, some great conversation on there at boards.irishbreakdown.com. On your way out, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review, and more importantly, have a great night and an awesome day tomorrow. And I look forward to talking to you all again on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.